Chapter 1317. Civilization was an inconceivable existence. No matter what happened, as long as the entire social structure was not destroyed in one go, this huge existence would always be able to repair itself. It could even turn everything good or bad, left behind by the impact into a part of itself, as if nothing had ever happened. In the past 3,000 years, humans on Earth had experienced too many changes. In the last 3,000 years on Earth, most of the time, humans had been in a feudalistic era with low productivity and slow progress. However, in these 3,000 years, humans seem to have turned on a cheat, going through the Third Industrial Revolution, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and even the Fifth, Sixth, and Seventh Industrial Revolution. In the first 1,000 years, humans' technological level went from the nanometer level to the millimeter level, and then to the picometer level. They could directly operate on the atomic level, and even move protons. To achieve such a high degree of precision, they no longer needed simple material science technology. More importantly, they needed to be able to control the force field. Using the electromagnetic force field to replace the original industrial synthesis machinery, they could achieve a precision of 10 to the minus 12 power, which was on the picometer level. Since then, it meant that humans had completely walked the path of electrochemistry. Turning stone into gold had also entered the realm of reality. Rare metals and other elements could even be directly synthesized using carbon and silicon atoms that could be found anywhere in the universe. In addition, humans' aerospace technology had also reached a new level with the control of the energy system and electromagnetic force. Although the speed of light was still insurmountable, and the fascinating space warp and space-time flight were still science fiction stories, there was a revolutionary change in the medium that provided propulsion for spaceflight. In the past, spaceships relied on their own fuel injection to form a reverse thrust force when they were launched on Earth. After leaving Earth, they could only rely on the initial speed to fly in the universe. However, when a new spaceship took off, it no longer relied on combustion. Instead, it relied on the anti-gravity system to rise vertically. When it was within the range of a solar system, it relied on remote control of gravity to move forward. For example, when leaving Earth, the gravitational engine was first aimed at Pluto. In the universe where there was no air resistance, it continuously increased the gravitational pull of the Earth and the Sun naturally. The spaceship would continue to accelerate. Relying on this gravitational system, the spaceship could easily accelerate to more than 7,000 kilometers per second in the solar system. When the spacecraft left the farthest planet around the solar system, the spacecraft directly activated the interstellar navigation system. It sounded complicated, but it was actually very simple. The interstellar traction system could attract the cosmic dust in front of the spaceship and eject it through the thrusters at the rear of the spaceship. Regardless of whether it was the traction in front or the ejection at the back, it could provide the spacecraft with continuous forward flight propulsion, allowing the spacecraft to reach a speed of more than 10,000 kilometers per second. Although space seemed to be a vacuum, it was not actually a void. There were usually large amounts of dust and even isotope particles floating in the vacuum. Protons, neutrons, and electrons could be extracted from these isotope particles to provide energy. Nuclear fusion had already broken away from the control of low-level nuclei such as hydrogen and deuterium. Instead, it directly jumped to the more subtle nuclear level, and the precision of the operation was directly implemented at the proton level. With the support of such a level of technology, human spaceships could practically move forever in the universe, unless they crashed into the true nothingness. But even so, relying on the propulsion medium and energy stored in the spaceship could cross a distance of more than 3 solar systems. The detection equipment that monitored the background of cosmic radiation could also guide people in advance to avoid the pure void. Unless they were unlucky enough to crash into a gravitational vortex or a cosmic storm, general space travel was very safe. Of course, the cracking of gravitational vortexes or cosmic storms was still beyond the level of human technology. This was not surprising. In the past, humans did not even understand the cause of lightning. During the sailing era, they were also helpless against the buoyancy vortex in Bermuda. With this level of technological advancement, humans had traveled to more than 3,000 galaxies near the solar system in the first millennium, developed more than 1,000 colonized planets, and conquered 3 primary civilizations that were either in the feudal era or in the primitive society. The total population of Earth's civilization had also reached the level of trillions. In the second millennium, the technological level of humans on Earth had directly reached the level of Fermi. For example, from 3000 to 4000 AD, humans could even carve on protons. In addition, through a deep understanding of the power of the universe and in-depth exploration of black holes, humans could finally locate through cosmic radiation. After sacrificing hundreds of thousands of pioneers, humans successfully solved the mystery of black holes. After more than 200 years of research, using the analysis of black holes as a foundation, humans could finally temporarily create a weakened version of artificial black holes through the control of force fields, which was a wormhole. In the beginning, the duration of artificial black holes from birth to destruction did not exceed 1/10,000th of a second. Moreover, the aperture was extremely small, and it was difficult to locate the direction of the exit. However, after 100 years of exploration, the diameter of the wormhole had been enlarged to hundreds of kilometers, and the duration had also reached 1/100th of a second. The direction of the exit could also be controlled within a certain range. Since then, humans had successfully mastered the technology of space travel, entered the next era, and became a true Level 2 civilization. After that, when humans truly swept through the Milky Way, they broke into the territory of another mature Level 2 civilization. It was the Level 2 civilization that had known of the existence of humans a long time ago. The sudden intrusion of Earth's civilization was beyond the expectations of this Level 2 civilization. They did not expect that in just over 1,000 years, this low-level civilization, which was extremely primitive in their eyes, had developed to this stage. The last time their intelligence personnel arrived on Earth was in 1786. They planned to send out their intelligence personnel again in 3786. There were still 179 years before they would send their intelligence personnel to Earth again. After all, the distance was very far. Even a Level 2 civilization would have to pay a huge price for such a long voyage. They did not think that a civilization that still used sailboats to sail on the sea would develop to a level that even they had to look at directly in just 2,000 years. The sudden appearance of Earth's humans caught them off guard. No one had expected that Earth's civilization would experience one technological explosion after another in such a short period of time. After a short test between the two sides, a war inevitably broke out. The veteran Level 2 civilizations were ahead of humans in all aspects of basic science. In the early stages of the war, humans were repeatedly defeated, and even their mother planet, Earth, was almost conquered. In order to preserve the continuation of the race's tinder, Earth's civilization even sent a total of more than 3 billion escape teams from various colonized planets. This was called the Tinder Project. 4 years after the Tinder Project was implemented, a scientist on the Tinder spaceship 79 finally developed a new combat mode that combined the Awaken's abilities with wormhole technology. Using the so-called mysterious energy in the Awaken's bodies, they could suppress the rules of the universe to a certain extent and create individual combat mechs that could travel short distances through wormholes. Following that, the Tinder spaceship 79 carried the hope of humanity's counterattack and killed its way back to the humans' last stronghold. In the next 100 years, Earth's civilization first used the interstellar mechs to stabilize their stronghold. At the same time, they further developed wormhole technology and crazily improved their weapons. In the end, they turned defeat into victory and completely conquered the veteran Level 2 civilizations. It took them 300 years to finally digest the technological achievements of the veteran Level 2 civilizations in the year 4000 AD. At the same time, another symbolic event happened. The last non-player, a baby, awakened as a player less than 3 days after it was born. Since then, Earth's civilization had a population of 10 trillion people and 10 trillion players. Human evolution once again entered a new chapter. Intelligence, physical strength, lifespan, and other characteristics were developed to the next stage. During the period from 4000 AD to 5000 AD, wormhole technology was developed to the extreme, including folding wormholes, morphing wormholes, space-tearing devices, and other technologies from scratch. The precision of human control had even reached the level of 10 to the minus 18th power, which was an amigo level. Through equipment, humans could even directly capture heat to synthesize quarks, electrons, and even protons and neutrons. Being able to convert energy into matter meant that humans had entered the next stage. If Earth's civilization was given enough time, with the creativity and productivity that humans were currently displaying, Earth's civilization could completely conquer the Milky Way. However, in the year 4987 AD, just as humans had completely mastered antimatter technology, a level 3 spiritual civilization that had ruled the Milky Way for more than 500 million years suddenly descended. A terrifying spiritual attack swept across the Orion Arm, Perseus Arm, and Sagittarius Arm with an irresistible force. These were the 3 Milky Way cantilever arms that had the footprints of Earth's civilization. This level 3 spiritual civilization clearly wanted to strangle the potential threat in the cradle in an instant. When low-level civilizations were not enough to pose a threat to them, the spiritual civilization was willing to observe the other party's progress as an observer. Through the analysis of low-level civilizations, the spiritual civilization could gain a lot of insights. After possessing absolute calmness and a sufficiently long lifespan, the best way to increase their knowledge was to observe the lives of others. Of course, if the conditions allowed, the spiritual civilization also wanted to leave the Milky Way and go to the nearby Andromeda Galaxy or other galaxies in the local galaxy cluster. However, the Andromeda Galaxy was too far away from the Milky Way. It was 5 million light-years away. The spiritual civilization could only drift at a speed of 3,000 kilometers per second, which was 1% of the speed of light. If they wanted to drift to the Andromeda Galaxy, they would need at least 250 million years. However, the oldest existence in this civilization was less than 5 million years old. They really did not have the courage to take such a step into the void. As for the other galaxy clusters in the even larger Virgo supercluster, it was even more impossible for them to explore it. The fear of the void was ingrained in the genes of the spiritual civilization. The existence of the spiritual civilization had brought them a long lifespan and extremely high intelligence, but it also made their bodies unable to ride spaceships like Earth's civilization, which was faster. In addition, although they had mastered wormhole technology, they could not let their bodies pass through the wormhole. They would be completely torn apart. Of course, the way they transmitted information and thought was also derived from their natural instincts that they had evolved. Even if two individuals were on opposite sides of the Milky Way and were separated by 100,000 light-years, they could communicate at any time like Earthlings chatting on QQ. Therefore, when they decided to launch an extermination operation against Earth's civilization, this spiritual civilization mobilized more than 100,000 individuals. They first quietly came to the vicinity of a planet inhabited by humans or a space station and suddenly launched an attack, exactly like what they had done many times in the past. The Earth's civilization had been born for less than 2 million years, and it had only been less than 20,000 years since it had truly become a civilization. It was not even as long as the individual lifespan of a level 3 spiritual civilization. To the spiritual civilization, wiping out a civilization with such a short lifespan was about as easy as picking off a rice grain-sized scar on a person's body. However, this spiritual civilization failed. Their mental attacks did not cause the slightest bit of harm to the humans on Earth. The reason was simple. The humans on Earth, who were all gamers, had a mental defense system that they could not understand at all. The depth of information in this defense system even exceeded the understanding of a level 3 civilization. It was higher than dark matter, higher than the basic forces of the universe, and even higher than the level of the existence of the universe itself. As soon as the mental attacks came into contact with this defense system, they were automatically counterattacked by the defense system. Then, these spiritual civilization individuals, whose bodies were at least 100 times the size of the sun, suffered a devastating impact. The bodies of the level 3 civilization individuals that did not have physical bodies completely collapsed in an instant, turning into dark matter and heat that drifted in the universe. Their memories were even devoured by the player's Esper abilities. This was not the end. The game system counterattacked for the awakened Esper abilities of the humans. After killing 100,000 spiritual civilization individuals, it continued to sweep through the natural mental link between the individuals of this civilization. Like a virus, it wiped out the ordinary members of the Level 3 civilization, ranging from monarchs to kingdoms, in an extremely short period of time. The humans on Earth regained their clarity after a short period of confusion. Many memories that they did not have before appeared in their minds. All the knowledge that the spiritual civilization had accumulated for more than 800 million years had been completely accepted by the Earth civilization just like that. The advancement of Earth's civilization from level 2.5 to level 3 was supposed to be a very long process. However, it had been skipped by someone in the form of a huge gift. The knowledge provided by level 3 civilizations not only included their own research on the spiritual level but also all the scientific and technological achievements of thousands of level 2 civilizations in the entire Milky Way galaxy over a total of 800 million years. The spiritual civilization lasted 800 million years from its birth to its destruction, ruling the Milky Way galaxy for 500 million years. However, be it the first 300 million years or the next 500 million years, this spiritual civilization never stopped plundering and spying on the knowledge of low-level civilizations. The great level 3 civilization had only made one mistake, which was to treat the awakening of the players on Earth as an ordinary evolution of the universe and not pay much attention to it. Of course, when they wanted to take this seriously, they immediately launched a thunderous attack. However, they never expected that they would be killed by the recoil. They did not even manage to kill a single Earthling. However, if they had done this in the early days, the humans of Earth would definitely have experienced pain. All non-player ordinary people would have died, but those who survived would have been able to obtain the knowledge of the level 3 spiritual civilization much earlier. As for which result was better, there was no answer. In short, everything they had accumulated benefited the humans of Earth. In the next 50 years or so, the Earth civilization digested the knowledge system of the entire Milky Way galaxy while fighting and contending with the Protoss in the game system. In the year 5041, humans were defeated by the Protoss in the Sea of Time, which had become even larger. The core of the dimension, which was hidden at the bottom of the Sea of Time, was obtained by the Protoss. In the year 5045, billions of human players benefited from the assistance of 2 indigenous martial emperors in the realm of True Force. They defeated the Protoss and obtained the true inheritance of the martial saint of True Force. They also controlled the highest peak of the mountain spirit. In the year 5050, humans and the Protoss finally entered the last game space. It was an unprecedentedly high-level and complex world. This place was called the World of Creation. At the same time, the super-civilization that ruled the Virgo galaxy, one of the true overlords of the Earth universe, arrived in the Milky Way. This was because the experimental sample that this super-civilization had released 63 years ago had been erased. The experimental sample of the super-civilization was the level 3 spiritual civilization that had once ruled the Milky Way. At this time, Qin Guang had returned. Chapter 1318. Earth, the highest administrative center of Earth's civilization and the mother planet that represented the power core of the entire level 3 civilization, was quietly floating above the orbit of the Sun. This blue planet had given birth to a great civilization. Thousands of years after the war with the level 2 civilization, this planet had not suffered any more attacks. The scars left on Earth by the war had long been completely repaired, turning into giant, artificial lakes with regular shapes. These lakes were named after many great people in the new human history, such as Zhuojingxi Lake, Wutong Lake, Tangying Lake, Xenchin Lake, Sun Xiaoshuan Lake, Jiang Yage Lake, Jin Shirue Lake, and Three Gozi Lake. These pioneers of the era might have been players, or they might have made great contributions to the progress of human civilization in the real world. They might have been the core leaders of the top player organizations in the early days, or they might have led the development of technology and trade. In short, great people had their own differences, and ordinary people had the same results. Of course, no matter how great they were, they could not compare to the ancestors of all players, to the first true new human in human history. He rose like a comet, like a meteor streaking across the sky. He had been in the world for less than 3 years, but the wealth he left behind for mankind was still illuminating the path of Earth's civilization after 3,000 years. He was the first suspected S-level player in history, the almighty Superman Qin Guang. The more powerful the person, the more they understood how unfathomable he was. In the past, he was considered to be the first S-rank player. But later on, as more and more successors became S-ranks, only then did they understand how powerful Qin Guang was. From the beginning, he was not on the same level as everyone else. In the era of players 3,000 years later, the strength he displayed in the game still had a crushing advantage. His name was still a taboo among the Protoss, the mortal enemy of mankind. He was a master of esports, and he had once raised the personal operation of esports to another level in the game Dota by himself. Esports played an extremely important role in the following 3,000 years of history, even as important as the development of technology. The reason was simple. Esports was the cradle of interstellar warfare. What was originally thought to be a plaything had actually given birth to the most important academy system in interstellar warfare. The training system for warship captains was derived from driving simulation games, or the more complicated and advanced flight simulation games that appeared later on. Battleship Gunner was born out of shooting FPS games. The concept of a special forces team came from MOBA games. In fact, during the war between humans and veteran Level 2 civilizations, the initial training for combat personnel was to become top-notch MOBA players. Their ability to react, strategize, teamwork, and operational skills in the game were all important indicators in Star Wars. The commanders of small and medium-sized battles came from RTS games. As early as 2000 AD, humans foresaw the day of interstellar warfare and developed the RTS games represented by StarCraft. The explosions that blossomed in the universe in the battles were both like brilliant flowers, carrying the resistance and the determination of human beings. At the same time, they were the plans that the commanders made in their heads one after another. Many years later, people would once again look back at Qin Guang's operation and awareness in the live broadcast, or in the global Dota Throne Challenge. Even though the tools he used were rather ancient keyboards and mice, the awareness and realm he displayed in the game were so advanced. Even though 2,000 to 3,000 years had passed, and countless dazzling geniuses and monsters were born in the glorious history of the conquest of Earth, there was still no one who could be compared to him. Not to mention, when human players continued to challenge the game missions in the later stages, they had more than once entered various game worlds that represented esports. The ultimate rewards of these players in the esports world were all kinds of strategies, skills, training methods, and even actual operation records that were closely related to the level of esports. Through these operational records, as latecomers, players were able to experience the state of the top players when they performed various godly operations from a first-person perspective. This valuable knowledge and experience was the foundation for the development of human interstellar warfare. When some talented players obtained the highest level of game rating, they could even personally receive the game system's reward, which was the right to communicate face-to-face with a senior expert. The face of this senior expert was that of the long-disappeared all-rounder, Qin Guang. Since then, Earth's civilization had finally confirmed that Qin Guang, once the strongest human, was not dead, nor was he missing. He was just ahead of all the players in the game system, going through one checkpoint after another in advance. The reason why humans on Earth could maintain a balance in the battle against the powerful and infinite number of Protoss players was precisely because they could always get the protection of Qin Guang along the way. Qin Guang also left behind an extremely valuable treasure for mankind. The linguistic masterpiece he wrote was like a can of old wine in the long river of time, becoming more and more fragrant as time went on. 4,987 languages represented 4,987 different cultures, each of which was a treasure of human civilization. Each culture could give birth to different modes of thinking, and when different modes of thinking constantly collided together, they could burst out even more intense sparks. As the founder of the new linguistics, Chen Guang's masterpiece played an extremely important role in the technological explosion that followed for the next 3,000 years. Chen Guang also left behind an operating manual on flight piloting. Incredibly, when humans entered the era of the universe and looked back at the operating manual that was stored in a rather primitive hard disk medium, and then flipped through the thick, antique printed matter, the pilots of space warships could still get a lot of benefits from it. It turned out that Chen Guang had already predicted that mankind would enter the era of the universe so many years ago, and he left behind such a treasure hundreds of years in advance. No one thought that the microcarving technique he created was useful back then. The world only thought of it as an exercise for the omnipotent Chen Guang when he was bored. When others looked back at the extremely low-resolution video he left behind, they did not understand the deeper meaning behind it. But in the year 3467, at the critical moment when mankind's technology was advancing from Pico to Fermi, when millions of scientists in the entire civilization were at a loss, a genius suddenly got inspiration from the pencil microcarving video left behind by Chen Guang, and human technology broke through to the Fermi level in one fell swoop. The monograph, The World School of Performing Arts, left behind by him seemed to be written only for movie entertainment, but as time went on, especially when mankind entered the era of the universe, faced with a huge amount of knowledge and a completely different view of the world and the universe, the value of the acting monograph, The World School of Performing Arts, was reflected. By studying The World School of Performing Arts, people could make their own thinking become extremely active, and they could better understand how to put themselves in other people's shoes, or consider problems from the perspective of other civilizations. It was the core philosophy derived from the World School that allowed mankind's ideological realm to surpass the shackles of carbon-based creatures and not be lost in the vast and endless abyss of the universe. Thanks to the core philosophy of the Grand Unification, the Earth civilization had a total population of more than 10 trillion people, and their footprints were all over the 3 galactic cantilever arms, Orion Arm, Perseus Arm, and Sagittarius Arm. Yet there was still no large-scale civil strife, and they could still be united at any time. As for the photocatalyst technology, it was the symbolic result of mankind's real technological explosion. Even after 3,000 years had passed, Morning Light Group was still one of the pillars of the human civilization's power structure. There were also pianos, darts, and many other legacies, none of which were useless. Not only did the many achievements and skills he left behind not become obsolete in the long river of time, but they became more and more important. It was the same in the game system. Even if no one could see his back, every player in the game could feel how many valuable assets he had left behind as a pioneer in the game. Of course, the most valuable assets he left behind were the Huaxia's heaven, as well as dozens of other great people he had personally trained and left their names in history. The reason why the era of the Great Revolution could pass smoothly and peacefully was because of the extremely powerful heaven and the Huaxia regime. The leaders of Morning Light Group and several other top-player teams also played an exemplary role. The Statue of God sect pursued peace under the guidance of their devout faith, leading the believers to eliminate differences. The world was shocked to find out that almost all of the top players were once his subordinates, friends, or simply his women. Under the leadership of these master-level powerhouses, the transition period that lasted until 2300 AD was particularly smooth. Therefore, in the hearts of the Earth civilization, Chen Guang was deified. This was originally a very strange thing. After all, the higher the level of technology of a civilization, the less they would believe in supernatural things, and the more rational and calm they would look at the laws of the world. In other aspects, the ideological development of the humans on Earth was completely in line with this standard. However, when it came to the matter of the omnipotent Superman, Chen Guang, everyone unanimously reached a consensus and continued to deify him. Even all of the Statue of God sect, Morning Light Group, Tianguang Group, and even the Heaven, which together occupied almost half of the human civilization, merged to form the almighty religion that spanned across the entire Milky Way. The only faith of this almighty religion was the omnipotent and omnipotent Superman, Chen Guang. Thousands of Level 2 civilizations worshipped him, unknowingly ruled over more than 100,000 Level 1 civilizations, and occupied the entire Milky Way as a supernova Level 3 Earth civilization. On one hand, they believed in God, but on the other hand, they continued to explode in technology. At this time, no one would have thought that their one and only God was standing in the form of a young man in a cemetery in Lulai County on their mother planet, Earth. The Chen Cemetery was built in the middle of the old Lulai County surrounded by mountains. It covered an area of more than 4,000 acres, and it was surrounded by green grass and lush trees. At this time, the summer afternoon sun shone down and fell on the white marble tombs, reflecting a bright light. In the distant sky, there were 99 pure white mechs floating around. The people operating these anti-gravity mechs were the most elite warriors among the humans. Their mission was to protect the peace of this cemetery. Only on the day of divine prayer, which happened once every 10 years, many people in power and the leaders of many forces in the Earth civilization were allowed to come to the cemetery to pay their respects and commemorate. At other times, even the Shadow Men, who were the best in the Milky Way at hiding their tracks and could shift their bodies between energy and physical forms, could not sneak in. However, at this time, a young man suddenly appeared and then sat cross-legged in front of the tombs without a care for his image. He looked at the tombs in front of him, such as Chen Guoli's tomb, Feng Rong's tomb, Jiang Ye's tomb, and other inscriptions, and his lips trembled. The expression on his face made it hard to tell whether he was crying or laughing. Perhaps, it could only be summed up with another word. Pain in the balls. What the F***ck, what the hell is this? Although I can reset time, it's still a pain in the balls. Chapter 1319. Normally, the moment Chen Guang appeared, the 99 pure white mechs flying in the sky would have charged over and interrogated him about who he was and what he was doing here. Over the years, there had been intruders in the Chen family cemetery, and it was not the first time. However, most of the intruders were from other civilizations, and there were very few humans from Earth. Even if there were humans from Earth who had intruded, it was not because of some unforgivable reason. It was simply because these people's worship of the ancestor of the Almighty Divine Church and Qin Guang was too strong. They wanted to go to the legendary birthplace of the Almighty Superhuman, the place where his family and relatives were buried, and feel the aura of the only true God of the human race at a close distance. Under normal circumstances, the stronger the worship of Qin Guang, the more talent one had for Qin Guang was, whether it was in the game or in reality. These intruders were fanatics from another perspective. After they were arrested, they did not have to suffer too terrible of a fate. If they were really capable, they would be put in an important position. However, those aliens who tried to pry into the mysteries of the rise of the human race were not so lucky. No matter how similar their disguise was, or even if they forcibly injected their consciousness into a body to become a clone, it was impossible to hide from the detection of Earth's civilization. The reason was very simple. All humans on Earth were players of the game. During the inspection, both parties only needed to show their cards to prove whether they were players or not. Then, they could be 100% sure that they were not aliens in disguise. Now, Qin Guang had been here for more than half an hour and had walked more than half a circle in the cemetery. However, the pure white mech did not move at all, which was very abnormal. Chen Guang did not take the initiative to make contact with the pure white mech. Since these people ignored him, he was happy to first understand the state of Earth's civilization after 3,000 years. Previously, he knew the progress of the human race like the back of his hand, but that was already before he entered the cup realm of the last dust heaven. At that time, Earth was still in the year 2187, and the many S-rank players that he had personally brought out were at most middle-aged, and they were all alive and kicking. How could he have known that after entering the mortal realm, 3,000 years had passed in the blink of an eye, and the deceased people had all turned into the inscriptions on the tombs, epitaphs, and even a pile of yellow soil below? Chen Guang was actually quite disgusted. Really, of all the places you could have buried, you chose to bury all of them in my hometown. You let me see so many familiar names engraved on the tombstone. Fortunately, the old man's nerves were relatively thick, otherwise he would have fainted from the discomfort. In addition, the passing of 3,000 years had caused him to lose track of the current development of Earth's civilization. Fortunately, even if his real body was here, his thoughts could still jump out of the Earth's universe. From the perspective of an observer, he could look at the entire universe from the outside, like admiring a goldfish in a fish tank. Of course, this included the Milky Way. Moreover, under such circumstances, the omniscience and omnipotence of his mind could be magnified to the extreme. How could an ordinary person's consciousness contain the amount of information contained in such a huge galaxy? It would explode in an instant. However, when Chen Guang jumped out of the Earth's universe and looked at the entire universe from the perspective of an observer, he would not face such a crisis. No matter how complicated the patterns on the goldfish's body were, or how profound the structure of the goldfish's body was, he could not let the tourist standing outside the fish tank see him as a fool. There was even a microscope in the tourist's eyes, and he could zoom in and out of everything in front of him at any time. He could look wherever he wanted and however he wanted to look. He did not need to see every single cell in the goldfish clearly. He only needed to see how big the goldfish was, whether the lines on its body showed any signs of illness, whether its mental state was good or bad, and whether it had any natural enemies outside. That was all he needed to know. The part of his mind that he used to observe the goldfish was not a clone. Instead, he temporarily borrowed himself from a cross-section of a dimension in a multidimensional space from his creation world and floated to the outside of the dimensional rugby ball formed by the fusion of the Earth's universe and the real world. He then focused his attention inside. As for the flow of his thoughts, it was of a higher level than the level 3 civilizations that had once ruled the Milky Way. His thoughts could cross time, space, and dimensional barriers. At least within the domain of the heavenly Holy Grail, his thoughts would not be obstructed at all. About 30 seconds later, Chen Guang retracted his thoughts, and his expression became very solemn. He really did not expect that the Earth's civilization would progress so far in these 3,000 years. From a primitive civilization that was not even a complete level 1 civilization, it had leaped to become the ruler of the Milky Way. It was a standard level 3 civilization that had developed completely in terms of matter, energy, dark matter, spiritual body, and so on, with 800 million years of accumulation. When he first arrived, he saw that the sun did not have any obvious changes, and he thought that humans had not grasped the technological level to modify stars. Now, it seemed that it was because the Earth's civilization was born with a strong sense of home. The solar system had a very special position in the entire Earth's civilization. Not only was it the cradle, but it also had many symbolic meanings. It was still the administrative center even now. Therefore, whether it was to protect the awakened elements of the players or to attach importance to the relics of their ancestors, the Earth's civilization had never carried out large-scale modifications to the Sun and Mother Planet Earth. In fact, they even strived to gradually restore everything to a more natural and ecological state. Of course, not modifying did not mean that many high-tech products were not left on Earth. Whether it was the perpetual motion floating city, Zhangjing College, or the Pan-Milky Way Galaxy Information Center, they all represented the highest technology that the current Earth's civilization had grasped. The 99 pure white mechas floating in the air in the distance were also the strongest individual weapons that had just been developed in the first half of the year. Not only did they have the antimatter function core, but they also had the newly researched wormhole shield technology. For long-range attacks, they had the tearing cannon and the dark matter pulse cannon. For close combat, they had the even more terrifying pulse wormhole warblade. Although the man-made wormhole was still unstable, the latest technological achievements could give it a fixed shape. It was like a long sword, and it could appear at a pulse frequency of hundreds of millions of times per second. It could truly cut through everything in the world. Coupled with the mobility of the pure white mechas, which could be used almost infinitely for short and medium-distance wormhole travel. A top S-level player only needed a pure white mecha to completely destroy a level 2 civilization. But now, these mechas were like dumb geese, ignoring Qinguang, intruder. The reason was very simple. The operators in the mechas had no autonomous consciousness at this time. Their minds had already entered the world of creation. This time, the game mission pulled the entire Earth's current tens of trillions of people into the world of creation, but it did not stop the flow of time in the outside world. This meant that the Earth's civilization was at an unprecedented moment when its defenses were at their weakest. Chen Guang also discovered the reason from observing from the outside of the Earth's universe. Then he put part of his attention back into the world of creation, only to find that in the infinitely vast space of the world of creation, there was an extra, almost negligible amount of energy. The worldview of the world of creation was too huge. The infinitely intersecting dimensions had infinite capacity, so that when trillions of human players and trillions of Protoss players entered at the same time, it was like throwing a grain of sand into the Pacific Ocean. It could not cause the slightest ripple at all. Of course, Chen Guang did not expect that while he was exploring the world of creation, the human players would be pulled into the world of creation at the same time. The current situation was very complicated. He was the body of the heavenly Holy Grail. At this time, the mind of his body was in the Earth's universe, and the human souls in the Earth's universe were in the world of creation, but the world of creation was in his body. Who was in whose stomach? This was simply an unsolvable trick like a Klein bottle. In addition, the current time was also very messed up. The moment before he came in, Earth's time was 2187, but now it had directly jumped to 50-50. So the question was, what year was the corresponding Earth's time in the void in the cup outside? Just thinking about it was enough to make one dizzy and confused. Forget it, let's help the Earthlings deal with the enemies outside the Milky Way first. Qinguang shrugged. The God-tier civilization was coming in full force. The other party was also very lucky. At this time, the defense of humans was extremely weak. Although the artificial intelligence defense system could make a certain degree of active defense, whether it was the strongest combat force or the highest decision-making, it still needed the leader of the civilization to make the decision. So at this time, the other party actually only had one clear-headed enemy. But they were also very unlucky, because the only clear-headed person was Qinguang, the real god that they could not understand. The vastness and longevity of the universe had nurtured all kinds of strange civilizations in this world that was close to infinity. Once, scientists on Earth thought that the diameter of the universe was 15 billion light-years, that the Virgo galaxy cluster was located at the edge of the universe, that the supercluster that included the Virgo galaxy cluster did not revolve, that it only had its own cycle, and that the center of mass of the supercluster was the center of the universe. Later, people found that the supercluster was still moving around the giant gravitational source in the depths of the universe. But after the civilization on Earth inherited all the knowledge of the level 3 spiritual civilization, all these theories were overturned. Even though the giant gravitational source was pulling the entire supercluster, it was still moving around another center of mass, which was an even larger giant gravitational source. So back and forth, the Earth's universe moved around the center of mass in this infinite cycle, forever expanding and extending. From the perspective of spatial dimensions, the structure of the universe was indeed infinite. Using physical methods, it was impossible to find the boundary of the Earth's universe. It could be said that any point in the universe was the center of the universe, but it could also be said that the Earth's universe did not have a center. But for Qinguang, or perhaps for time, the universe was limited, so he could jump out of the universe and see a complete bit wall in the shape of a football. But this limit was too long. Whether it was a level 3 civilization or a god-tier civilization that was preparing to sweep through the Milky Way, a limited time was equivalent to an infinite amount of time. So for Qinguang, who had infinite dimensions and had already jumped out of the universe, the so-called god-tier civilization was still as low-level as a caterpillar stuck to his clothes. The difference between the two was infinite. Chapter 1320. There was once a scientist who proposed the theory of the Big Bang universe. It could be roughly summarized that in the early stages of the birth of the Earth universe, the original universe was just a point that was extremely compressed together. It could even be understood as nothing. This was similar to an absolute vacuum, but it could also be understood as the opposite of a vacuum. An absolute vacuum referred to a true and complete nothingness in a certain area. There was nothing at all. Before the Big Bang, nothing was in this region. It was completely filled with matter and energy, and there wasn't even the slightest gap between everything and each other. The density of a neutron star was hundreds of trillions of times that of water. This was because there were gaps between atoms and water molecules. The density of a neutron star was equal to the density of the atomic nucleus. Without the influence of chemical bonds, a neutron star was completely stacked together as one neutron after another. If the Earth was compressed to the density of a neutron star, then the entire Earth's matter could only be condensed into a small ball with a diameter of 22 meters. However, the density of a black hole was higher than that of a neutron star. If the Earth was compressed into a black hole, it might not even be the size of a dandruff. As for the nothing in the early stages of the birth of the universe, its density was higher than that of a black hole. When humans were still a level 1 civilization, it was believed that the atomic nucleus could not be compressed. However, in reality, whether it was the protons, neutrons, or even electrons that made up the atomic nucleus, they were still spherical areas formed by quarks that were between the state of matter and the state of energy in high speed and regular motion. This spherical area was like a bubble. It seemed to be filled with air, but in fact, there was still an infinite distance between it and it was very spacious. The so-called law of uncertainty was nothing more than the fact that the measurement methods in the past were not advanced enough. In a universe that strictly followed the rules and laws of the universe, there was no such thing as irregular and uncertain. Continuing to look at the microscopic direction, whether it was quarks or photons, there was still a spatial structure within them. All spatial structures were completely erased, and matter and energy were completely gathered together. This was the opposite of an absolute vacuum, nothing. This nothing was regarded as an energy or a form of matter that the entire universe could not understand. It was a realm higher than the Earth universe. The mass of nothing was equal to the entire Earth universe, but its volume was infinitely small. In the theories of some visionaries, nothingness could also be called a singularity. The force that bound all the matter in nothingness together was not the van der Waals force, electromagnetic force, bond force, or any other force recorded in the books of humans on Earth. It was also another kind of rule force that exceeded the limits of the Earth's universe. The explosion of nothing formed the universe. It could be simply understood as a hydrogen balloon floating from the ground to the sky. Then, because the pressure inside the hydrogen balloon was greater than the thin air at high altitude, the hydrogen balloon finally exploded under the influence of the internal pressure. Then, from a certain point of view, nothingness could be compared to an exploding hydrogen balloon that was thrown from a higher level into the Earth's universe where everything was originally nothingness. As the internal rules, and forces exceeded the limits of the Earth's universe, it exploded the moment it appeared, just like the pressure difference inside and outside the hydrogen balloon caused an explosion. After nothingness exploded, it released matter and energy, eventually forming the current universe. The question was, where did the void before the explosion of nothingness come from? How did nothing come about? Naturally formed? Or was it just a beautiful coincidence that conformed to the laws of nature? Or was it actually the influence of some man-made factors? This nothing was just a firework casually thrown out by some outer space civilization. From the birth of the entire universe until now, it was actually just a fireworks show, or maybe it was just a dud in a large-scale fireworks show. Wasn't this a little too sad? Or was it like the lower planes that were personally created by many god emperors, created by God? These questions could not be answered by any civilization in the entire Earth's universe. They were born here, and all their development and ideas were limited here. they could not become the fish that jumped out of the river. These restrained civilizations, of course, included the ruler of the Virgo supercluster, the so-called God-tier civilization. The footprint of this God-tier civilization in exploring the universe was many times larger than the current human civilization. Their technological level was also many levels higher, but compared to the real infinite space of the universe, they were still as immature as babies. The Virgo civilization was called a God-tier civilization, not because this civilization had really become a god, but because in the knowledge system of Earth's civilization, civilizations could only be classified as level 3. Any higher and they would completely surpass the knowledge system of Earth's civilization. Even if there was another civilization whose level of evolution surpassed the Virgo civilization by 8 streets, in the knowledge system of Earth's civilization, it would still be called a God-tier civilization. However, no matter how advanced a God-level civilization was, it was still essentially the same as a super-primitive civilization that was trapped on a certain planet, or even the back of a certain mountain on this planet, and could only use the most basic tools of production, such as stones and wooden sticks. But they did not know this, and they thought that they were much more advanced. At this time, outside the Milky Way galaxy, about 30,000 light-years away from the outer arm of the Milky Way galaxy, there was a silver ball with a diameter of 999 meters floating quietly. This was the vehicle that the Virgo civilization sent. The vehicle looked like a meteorite, but it actually had an extremely complicated internal structure. There were more than 100 million intelligent beings living inside, but the internal space was not crowded at all. On the contrary, it was very spacious. In this vehicle, every individual of the Virgo civilization had their own unique planet. The exterior diameter of the spherical vehicle was only 999 meters, but the internal space was more than 5 light-years wide. The Virgo civilization already had the technology to compress space, and the interior of the seemingly simple spherical vehicle was actually completely compressed into a space of 5 light-years. For the sake of creating such a vehicle, the Virgo civilization had used up the energy of over 1 billion stars, and created a collapsed space of over a few hundred light-years. The entire Virgo civilization had tens of millions of similar vehicles. The Virgo civilization's understanding of the laws of the universe, their control of power, and their use of dark matter was not something that a level 3 civilization could compare to. They had already gone from purely using the laws of the universe to a deeper level of fusion with the universe. Not only could they change their bodies between matter and energy, they could also control all the matter and energy in the universe around them. To them, every spherical vehicle was equivalent to a country, and the most unique aspect of the Virgo civilization was that their individuals could exist independently and could link their thoughts together to form a collective intelligence like an ant. At this time, the 100 million Virgo people in the spherical vehicle had a shared memory and knowledge. This was their unique advantage, and was also the reason why their civilization was able to stand out in the huge Virgo supercluster. For example, the people of Virgo constellation were equivalent to giving every human on Earth the ability to do mental calculations like a supercomputer and the memory of a large-scale data center. This was simply a cheat for the entire race, and it was the kind of cheats that were shameless and shameless. Of course, the current humans on Earth were even more shameless. The awakened players were able to cheat the heavens. It was just that the current Earth civilization was still unable to unleash the full power of this cheat. The level 3 spiritual civilization that had previously ruled over the Milky Way galaxy was actually a tool released by the spherical vehicle nation. The significance of this tool to them was to observe the birth, prosperity, and decline of every civilization from the perspective of a bystander. When their own technological level had reached a limit and was almost unable to progress further, they could observe a low-level civilization, or even create a low-level civilization and steal their ideas. This was a shortcut for this super high-level civilization. Now that their tools had been wiped out in an instant, it was either the invasion of a high-level civilization from another supercluster, or there was a strange change that they could not understand. Of course, the Virgo civilization had to come over to investigate. At this time, they had already come to a conclusion. The high-level spiritual civilization that they had personally modified had actually been wiped out by the carbon-based creatures. This was ridiculous. Weren't these carbon-based creatures a little too invasive? Couldn't they have left a spark for us? How did they manage to cover the entire Milky Way galaxy in an instant and wipe out our tools in an instant? Also, until now, this low-level carbon-based civilization had not entered the core area of the Milky Way galaxy. This meant that they had not obtained the ability to compress space through analyzing the center of mass of a large galaxy. They were still behind them and would not pose a threat to them. After selecting a few individuals and trying to peek into their memories, they finally discovered that this carbon-based life did not have the ability to share knowledge with each other. After confirming that they could not use this usurper to continue observing the entire Milky Way galaxy, the Virgo civilization immediately decided to start the erasure operation. The Milky Way galaxy was their farm. Of course, they had to grow crops that were useful to them. Chapter 1321. After making the decision, the spherical carrier of the Virgo civilization, named Orpha 3, quickly moved. Without any need for acceleration or energy storage, the silver surface of Orpha 3 gradually glowed, from dark to bright, and quickly became as bright as a star. This was not ordinary visible light, but all kinds of radiation that the Virgo civilization's carrier actively released under the premise of complying with the laws of the universe. More than 1 million radiation lines gathered together, forming a seemingly ordinary but actually mysterious, visible light beam. At this time, the light released by the entire Orpha 3 carrier was composed of more than 100 billion visible light beams, with different structures and compositions. About 10,000ths of a second later, the background radiation and light released by the carrier floating outside the Milky Way illuminated almost 1,000th of the Milky Way. The next moment, Orpha 3 suddenly disappeared, and when it reappeared, it was directly above the center of mass of the Milky Way, looking like a glass bead floating on a large plate. Of course, the plate was a little too big, and the glass bead was a little too small. In the vast void of the universe, positioning seemed simple, but it was actually a profound thing. If a person stood in the wilderness and could not find a reference, it was easy to lose their sense of direction, not to mention the universe was full of stars, and the distance was directly measured in light years. Everyone knew that there must be a mass core in the Milky Way, which was the geometric center of the entire Milky Way. However, to stand outside the Milky Way, find this point accurately from above, and accurately aim at the geometric center from a vertical angle, the requirements for measurement accuracy and range were simply outrageous. Of course, conventional measurement methods could not be used, even if light and cosmic background radiation were used as a reference. The diameter of the Milky Way was 100,000 light-years, and light had to travel for 100,000 years. Obviously, the Virgo civilization's measurement was not based on light or background radiation, but on another kind of space technology. It directly identified the geometric center of the Milky Way, and then attached wormhole characteristics to the surface of the Orpha 3 carrier. The entire carrier traveled tens of thousands of light-years in an instant, teleporting to its location. This was also how the races of the Orpha 3 kingdom migrated. No matter what they did, the Orpha 3 kingdom, which had a population of hundreds of millions, moved together. They were not worried about encountering a disaster of genocide. At least since the birth of Orpha 3, they had never encountered any real threats in the Virgo supercluster. Even if there was, to the Virgo constellation civilization that had grasped the spatial compression technology and was deeply integrated with the universe, it was not a big deal. If I can't beat him, I'll just run, okay? As long as he was willing to expend energy, how could Orphazan, who had the ability to instantly teleport 100,000 light-years away, be caught up to? A backward level 3 civilization would still need to establish coordinates to travel through the Milky Way. They would need to find a low-power point that could create a large-scale stable wormhole, but they did not need to. He could go wherever he wanted and leave whenever he wanted. After arriving at the predetermined location, a cone slowly extended from Orpha 3, aiming from top to bottom at the geometric core of the Milky Way. Then the light on the surface of Orpha's 3 carriers quickly converged, and the top of the cone gradually glowed with a dark shimmer. A strange vibration spread out from the top of the cone. The normal void of the universe was unable to transmit waves, just like how sound was unable to transmit through vacuum. However, the vibrations released by the Virgo constellation civilization were completely different from sound waves. What it vibrated was not even matter or energy in the usual sense, but vacuum. The principle of triggering the vibration was not simply the collision of matter, but directly from a more subtle level, directly vibrating the fundamental force and interfering with the quark structure. The vibration was completely beyond the understanding of level 3 civilizations at a speed of more than 10,000 light-years per second, spreading down to the Milky Way in the shape of an inverted cone. At this time, Chen Guang's consciousness returned to the void in the cup and saw this scene. The vibrations released by Orpha 3 caused spatial cracks to spread down in the shape of tree roots. Based on the distance between Orpha 3 and the Milky Way, this tree root net could just cover the entire Milky Way. Is this going to erase the entire Milky Way? Isn't this a little too vicious? Chen Guang, who was standing on Earth, looked up at the sky and muttered to himself. The sun and clouds could not block his vision. At this time, he had 2 pairs of eyes. One pair grew on his body, looking up from the ground, and the other grew outside of Earth's universe, looking down from a higher plane. 2 pairs of eyes, 2 lines of sight. One was the habit of being a human, and the other was the hobby of being a god. At this time, Chen Guang was both a human and a god, but he was not a so-called low-end demigod. Instead, he had walked the path of both human and god to the extreme. The Orpha 3 did not regard Earth's civilization as a threat at all. They thought that this erasure operation was no different from the many times in the past. It was just a targeted cleanup of a low-level civilization. In the eyes of a god-tier civilization, even a level 3 space civilization was still just a dispensable parasite in the universe. The existence of a low-level civilization might enrich the diversity of species in the universe and provide nutrients for culture, art, technology, and knowledge. However, in the vast universe, or just in the Virgo supercluster, the impact of one low-level civilization or one low-level civilization was not that big. Otherwise, even if one of them was destroyed, a new level 3 civilization would rise up and replace it in a few decades, at most tens of millions of years. Observing different forms of low-level civilizations might yield different benefits, but for the Virgo civilization, which had collective intelligence and an almost eternal lifespan, observing tomatoes or potatoes made no difference. After all, when a Virgo individual reached adulthood, as long as they connected their mind to the kingdom, they would be able to instantly share all the knowledge and even part of their soul. Therefore, even though the individual lives of the Virgo civilization were short, the kingdom they formed was immortal. About 30 seconds later, the wave cracks released by the Orpha 3 accurately captured every planet, space station, and even small mining machines that had traces of human life on Earth. They covered a total of more than 1 billion objects. It was impossible to explain how the Virgo constellation managed to do it. From the moment they arrived outside the Milky Way galaxy, to the completion of positioning, to the time they took to take action, and finally to accurately capture all traces of life on Earth, it only took a total of less than 700 seconds. The methods and technology they used were deeply integrated with the laws of the universe. When technology evolved to the extreme, it would also have some characteristics similar to divinity, such as the species' directional universe ripple controlled by the Virgo civilization. This was the technological suppression of a god-tier civilization. To them, it was as simple as eating and drinking soup, but in the eyes of low-level civilizations, it was simply unreasonable. The generation difference in technology and information created a huge gap between high-level civilizations and low-level civilizations, just like how Huskies could never learn how to play King of Glory. However, Chen Guang could understand. When he saw the ripples connected to various planets or spaceships, he understood the meaning of this attack. The Virgo civilization was not crazy enough to try to wipe out the entire Milky Way galaxy. They did not have the ability to do so. The ripples they released were a bit like the naming in the myths, like the golden-horned deity's naming gourd, which had the ability to attack in a specific direction. If I call you grandson, do you dare to agree? If you agree, you will be sucked into the gourd. Obviously, they had collected the genetic information of humans on Earth before, and then used the universe ripple to directly attack the collected genetic information. The space collapse caused by the cosmic rift wave would only be limited to the range of activities of the Earth civilization. It seemed to be more than 1 billion units, but for the Milky Way, which had hundreds of billions of stars and trillions of planets, it was not worth mentioning at all. After destroying the Earth civilization, the other thousands of Level 2 civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy would soon be replaced by a new civilization. At this time, in Orpha 3, a heated discussion was going on. Group intelligent civilizations were like this. They could reach a consensus in an instant, but they would never stop debating. Of course, no matter how the debate developed, it would not affect their preparation for the extermination operation in advance. When the time came, it would only be an instant decision whether to do it or not. The shockwave connection is complete. Next, everyone, please hold the Orpha 371. 3 billion. 88th National Discussion. The discussion time is 30 needles. This needle was the time measurement unit of the Virgo civilization. 30 needles was equivalent to 99 seconds for humans on Earth. Hundreds of millions of individuals were participating in the discussion at the same time, and they could reach a conclusion in less than 100 seconds. This was thanks to the unique information sharing ability of the Virgo civilization. For a time, countless thoughts flowed in Orpha 3. Faced with such a huge amount of information, if Earthlings as carbon-based life forms heard it, they would probably go crazy on the spot. For example, if someone could do it, it would be equivalent to someone being able to bargain with 100 aunties in 1 million vegetable markets at the same time. Actually, this carbon-based civilization is very interesting. We can also consider continuing to observe them. Their social structure is quite unique. That's right. They clearly have the technological level of a Level 3 civilization, but their biological ideology and civilization structure still maintain the republican system of a Level 1 civilization. It's incredible. This is because the rise of this civilization is too short. Using their time unit to calculate, it is only 3,000 years, which is more than 10,000 times faster than the normal progress of a civilization. They just haven't adapted to their current level of technology. According to the common sense, if a civilization wants to evolve, it must first complete the adjustment of the social structure. Their civilization advancement is abnormal and does not conform to the objective laws of the universe. Doesn't that make it more interesting? Why don't we observe them for another 1 million years? But it may also be because of some unexpected factors that even we can't control. Isn't that better? We need accidents. Accidents may be a shortcut to science. But we found religion in their civilization, and they are very devout. Their accident may be related to religion, which is a huge threat to us. That's right. Their religion is different from ordinary low-level civilizations. It seems to be a personal worship of an individual in their own civilization. The Pula Humanities Research Laboratory believes that this individual, who is worshipped by his own race, must have extraordinary power. It may even surpass the information depth of a Level 3 civilization, and it may even make our own individuals worship him. Then, the representative of the Pula Humanities Research Laboratory did not finish his sentence. The remaining half was that if a Virgo in Orpha 3 also worshipped that individual, then because of the natural information sharing of the Virgo civilization, this superfluous emotion may even spread to the entire planet in an instant. That would definitely cause catastrophic consequences. If the emotion of religious worship was strong enough, it may even make the entire Virgo in Orpha 3 instantly become his believers. So, for everyone's safety, in order to kill the possible threat of religion in time, I strongly suggest that it be erased immediately. But if we turn on the thought shield, we can avoid being affected by their religion. The individuals worshipped by the Earth civilization have also disappeared for a long time. Judging from their lifespan, they should be dead. I have to tell you a piece of unfortunate news. Until now, Colin's laboratory has still not been able to crack the direct cause of the demise of the experimental civilization. Therefore, the Earth civilization must have an attack method that even we can't understand. Then why don't we just read their memories? The only thing we can be sure of is that the experimental civilization attempted to launch an attack on their spiritual level, and then they were destroyed. We should not take risks when we can't determine the specific countermeasures of the Earth civilization. This is how Orpha I and Orpha II were destroyed. Discussion is closed. Please vote. 3 needles, that is, less than 10 seconds later, the vote to determine the fate of the Earth civilization was completed without the knowledge of the Earthlings. Only less than 5% of the Virgo civilization chose to continue to observe, less than 1 in 100,000 people chose to let the Earthlings go, and the rest all chose to be erased immediately. As the Archon of the Orpha III kingdom made a reply and pressed the button on the planet belonging to the Archon, the cosmic ripple connected to the Earth suddenly became more active. In an instant, strange substances and energies that were originally undetectable and difficult to understand were born near the ripple. If the Earth scientists remained sober at this time, they would probably fall into ecstasy. If these strange substances and energies were captured and cracked, at least the Earth civilization, which already had the technological level of a level 3 civilization, could take a big step forward. A large number of strange substances and energies quickly rushed forward along the cosmic ripple, rushing straight to many units with traces of the Earth civilization. It only took less than 1 microgram of strange matter energy to completely destroy the Earth. During the whole process, the Virgo civilization remained absolutely calm. After the vote, they stopped discussing and just quietly waited for the erasure to be completed. Then they might stay outside the Milky Way for tens of thousands of years, waiting to cultivate the next level 3 civilization before leaving. But suddenly, the cosmic ripple they released stopped moving. Of course, this also included the strange matter energy gathered on the cosmic ripple. The object of worship of the Earth religion, which they thought should have died long ago, directly appeared in the void of the universe less than 10 meters away from the Orpha III carrier. The defense system that the Orpha III was proud of did not notice his approach at all. The Virgo people could not understand how he approached. There were no gravitational fluctuations, nor any signs of wormholes. It was like a mass of matter appeared out of thin air, completely violating the rules of the conversion of mass and energy in the universe. In just an instant, more than 100 million Virgo people reached a consensus. This seemingly low-end level 3 civilization really had high technology that they could not understand. Chapter 1322. Of course, they could not understand Chen Guang's method of movement. Chen Guang did not use the usual wormhole traversal in the universe, nor did he use the space-folding method to warp. He simply used his authority as the owner of the Holy Grail to jump out of the universe, and then jumped back from the void in the cup. At the same time, he landed directly near Orpha III. If it was before, he would not be able to leave while he was in the World Within Cup mission, but as he progressed through the Holy Grail mission system, he began to gain more and more privileges. He had just found out about this, but he could not leave for too long, no more than 5 seconds, or else he would be punished by the Holy Grail and be instantly judged dead. But 5 seconds was enough. At this time, Chen Guang quietly floated in space, looking at the silver ball close at hand. Although he had been the ruler of the universe for a long time, this was the first time he floated in space with his physical body, and he was a little uncomfortable. Fortunately, his physical body was strong enough now, and he could transform his body into a high-level life form at any time, so he could survive without oxygen. After a few seconds of delay, Chen Guang had completely adapted to space, and turned to look at the cone in front of him that was releasing the cosmic wave. Previously, he had already used a remote control from outside the universe to fix the cosmic ripple and the strange object energy attached to it. The method was not very profound. It was simply using the power of the Holy Grail and divine power to control the laws of the universe. He forcefully set the attack of the Virgo civilization as unreasonable, so that it could no longer spread in the universe like before. However, because the Earth universe was too large and had the ability to repair itself, and it was itself one of the 9 special worlds within cups. Unless Chen Guang completely completed all the tests of the Holy Grail and obtained the last level of authority, he could not let his interference continue forever. About an hour later, the self-repair of the Earth universe would make his interference disappear. Before that, Chen Guang had to deal with the Virgo civilization and completely retract the species attack that they had released. He had tried before. He could also directly erase all the strange object energy from the outside, but this would cause too much pressure and interference to the Earth universe, and it might even cause a large-scale space collapse. The directional interference of strange objects and cosmic waves was the limit of his manipulation of this universe. Any more drastic actions might shake the stability of the universe itself. Once he jumped out of the universe, he could change the fundamental laws of the entire plane with just a simple action. It was just like how a human could change the ecological environment of all the microorganisms in a petri dish just by spitting saliva into it. If he had just taken an antibiotic, a little bit of his saliva would be enough to wipe out the microorganisms, and it would be a tragic species choice. Therefore, if there was a choice, it was best to resolve the problem within the universe. Chen Guang had no other choice. The range of the other party's attack was too wide, and there were too many units involved. There were billions of cosmic waves, and he would not be able to make it in time if he did not attack from the outside. During the few seconds when Chen Guang was still, the Orpha Kingdom was in a complete mess. What should we do now? Are we going to negotiate with him? We should leave this place immediately and ask for help from the Empire. Yes, the ideology of the Earth civilization is completely different from ours. There is no basis for negotiation. They have mastered technology that is beyond the understanding of the Orpha. Only the whole empire can unite to destroy them. The discussion is over. Now let's vote. Voting time, 1 needle. As the consul's voice fell, several options appeared in the minds of every Virgo at the same time. They were A. Take the initiative to attack, B. Retreat, C. Communicate, D. Surrender. In addition to these 4 options, there was another top priority option, which was to ask for help from the Empire and send a message. No matter what happened next, it was necessary to report this matter to the Empire. Although the kingdoms of the Virgo constellation were basically equal existences, and there was no distinction of being superior or inferior, but just like a kingdom with over 100 million individuals linking their thoughts together to form a collective intelligence, the empire that covered the entire Virgo constellation was a higher-level structure, and included over 10 million kingdoms in the empire. The so-called empire referred to the entire Virgo civilization, which was made up of more than 10 million kingdoms. However, due to the distance, the relationship between the kingdoms in the empire was not as close as the relationship between individuals in the same kingdom. Information transmission took a longer time, and it was impossible to synchronize the thoughts of the entire empire. Therefore, the kingdoms were more like an alliance. Of course, this alliance was very solid. Because of the racial characteristics, when these empires came together, they would even automatically exchange thoughts, transfer memories, and share information, so there was no basis for betrayal. More than 10 million kingdoms of the Virgo civilization wandered in the huge superstar cluster, continuously spying on low-level civilizations, collecting information, and directly plundering resources when necessary. This unique social structure created their unique civilization, allowing them to turn misfortunes into blessings again and again in their long history, surviving one disaster after another, and evolving at a speed that was several orders of magnitude ahead of other civilizations. As long as the information was sent out, the entire Virgo civilization would receive it in about half an hour. At that time, whether they wanted to launch an all-out attack with the power of the entire civilization or immediately take the risk of migrating to the unknown deep space to another superstar cluster would be the result of a vote by the entire civilization. No matter what the final fate of the 3 kingdoms was, whether they sacrificed themselves, escaped, or successfully defeated the unknown civilization of Earth, it would all be meaningful. After a while, the result of the vote was out, and it was to escape. In the blink of an eye, the surface of Orpha's silver spheres suddenly lit up with a glow that had appeared before. At the same time, Qin Guang, who was leaning against Orpha's side, felt a strong force pushing toward him. At the same time, the surface of his body violently exploded with a strange vibration, as if he was about to be torn apart from the middle. At the same time, another ripple of extremely deep information was released from behind Orpha's back, flying into deep space. Relying on the convenience brought about by group intelligence, the people of Virgo could even do hundreds of millions of things at the same time. This was a piece of cake. However, Chen Guang didn't take it seriously at all. This attack couldn't hurt him. Fang Xingjian first disappeared from where he was and directly chased after the ripple signal that was escaping at 10,000 times the speed of light. He then raised his hand, and what was surging in his palm was a new version of inner force that seemed ordinary but was actually quite useful. He waved his hand, and the energy transformed from the inner strength gushed out of his palm, turning into a large net that instantly covered an area of more than millions of kilometers. The invisible ripple that was 10,000 times faster than light crashed into the net formed by Qin Guang's internal energy and couldn't move an inch. The depth of the laws of the new version of internal energy was also far above that of Earth's universe. Chen Guang's move had completely sealed off time, space, energy, and matter in the entire region, including the signal released by Orpha and the others. The three kingdoms were puzzled as to why the Earthling had suddenly disappeared. He couldn't have been decomposed by our splitting force field, right? That's possible. After all, the splitting force field is a great flux-grade weapon and can decompose microscopic particles. Perhaps he was directly reduced to the heat of the universe. The detector didn't detect the existence of matter. Then he was indeed decomposed into energy. But there was no extra radiation detected, and no heat was released. Just like when he appeared, he completely disappeared. He didn't pass through any medium, and there were no signs of spatial vibrations. Not good. The signal we sent out has been frozen. Don't joke around, this is impossible. But this is the truth, moreover. Moreover what? I also detected that the signal we sent out has returned. Was it captured by him? This terrifying news instantly entered the ears of the 100 million Virgo people. Then, they simultaneously saw Qin Guang's figure appear outside Orpha's three kingdoms. The huge Orpha's 3 kilometers instantly sank into a deathly silence. What was happening at this time could be completely explained by the myths and legends of Earth's civilization. Flying tens of thousands of kilometers with a somersault cloud, holding a mustard seed, or God was omnipotent. Otherwise, it could be the teleportation innate skill of a great demon. But when the level of science and technology reached the level of Virgo civilization, they could almost use their own knowledge to explain everything in the universe. If there was something they couldn't explain, they wouldn't think of it in the direction of myths and would only think that the other party's level of science and technology had formed a generation gap with their own. Therefore, even the so-called teleportation, which the Earthlings didn't take seriously, had caused such a huge shock to them. Chen Guang finally spoke. He opened his mouth slightly. People inside, listen up. You have been surrounded. A deafening voice suddenly appeared inside Orpha's 3 kingdoms, filling the compressed space with a diameter of 5 light years. Many individuals of the Virgo civilization couldn't react for a moment. What was this Earthling saying? About 1,000th of a second later, Chen Guang's words were translated. We have been surrounded? He alone has surrounded 100 million of us? He's not joking, right? Of course, Chen Guang wasn't joking. After capturing the ripple signal released by Orpha's 3 kingdoms, he had made preparations in advance this time. He released the new version of internal energy from his palm and wrapped up Orpha's 3 kingdoms, which had an external diameter of 999 meters. Now, whether they wanted to ask for help or escape, there was no chance. But the stubborn Orpha's 3 kingdoms wouldn't give in so easily. They were the masters of the Virgo supercluster. The light shrouding the surface of the silver sphere became brighter. Suddenly, Orpha's 3 kingdoms shook violently, as if the television signal wasn't too good. They used the surface wormhole that could move 100,000 light years at once. However, it was useless. After a series of crazy shaking, everything became dull and tasteless. Oh no, nothing happened after the shaking. Orpha's 3 kingdoms couldn't teleport out at all. I told you, you have been surrounded. Why don't you believe me? Shrugging his shoulders, Chen Guang wore a helpless expression. But the Virgo civilization couldn't read the meaning of Chen Guang's expression. They only felt that he was looking down on them. As for the failure of the teleportation, they didn't think it was Chen Guang's operation. They just thought that the vehicle itself had malfunctioned. Fight back or surrender. For now, the enemy was too strong. The 3 kingdoms immediately started the next round of voting. This time, there were 2 fewer options than before. There was no negotiation or escape. They had always been this straightforward. If they couldn't win, they would run. If they couldn't run, they would surrender. As long as they could maintain the continuation of their race, being enslaved for a while was not unacceptable. With their will and ability, and their talent for digesting other people's technology, sooner or later, they would be able to absorb the other party's more advanced knowledge for their own use. When that time came, it would be hard to say who would be enslaved. Along the way, the Virgo civilization had experienced similar situations more than once. Their surrender was absolutely wholehearted, but that was only submission to the strong. If the situation was reversed and they grew to be strong, they would naturally resist. In the eyes of the Virgo civilization, all of this was in line with the laws of the universe. The results of this vote were controversial. In the end, the counterattack won the vote with an advantage of 787,124%. Without any hesitation, after 1,000th of a second, a black round tube about the thickness of a finger appeared on the 3 sides of Orpha facing Chen Guang. This was the strongest weapon on Orpha, the legendary annihilation cannon that could annihilate space. Chen Guang silently approached, stretched out his finger, and stuffed it into the hole. Is he stupid? Using his finger to block the annihilation cannon? Does he really understand what he's doing? Suddenly, the consul's voice sounded in the minds of every Virgo. I propose to increase the power, overload the annihilation cannon, and inject 89% of the remaining energy. If we do this, if he can really block the annihilation cannon, Orpha may also be destroyed. The consul replied, yes, that's why I started voting and let everyone decide together. Another few seconds passed, and the results of the vote were out. The full power cannon had an advantage of 546,998% over the conservative counterattack strategy. With the infusion of a huge amount of energy, Orpha began to rumble and tremble. The operation of 89% of the energy caused the interior of Orpha's 3 to become unstable. Orpha's 3, which was originally as bright as day under the illumination of the inner walls, quickly dimmed after most of the energy was supplied to the annihilation cannon. The remaining 11% of the energy was used as a force field shield, trying to resist the radiation effects of the annihilation cannon. But this was just a precaution. Unless the Earthling really blocked the annihilation cannon, Orpha 3 would still be safe. Everything that had happened since they arrived in the Milky Way was beyond the understanding of the Virgo civilization. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret in this world. If they had known that the waters of the Milky Way were so deep, they would probably have chosen to only send a probe or directly carry out a long-range attack, and they would not have been as embarrassed as they were now. Another few seconds passed, and the annihilation cannon finally finished accumulating energy. A powerful, yet indescribable, mass energy flow rushed out of the annihilation cannon at thousands of times the speed of light. As the mass energy flow of annihilation rushed forward, the space along the way quickly collapsed, and the infusion of energy turned everything into nothingness. The state of matter and energy in this space was very similar to the nothingness before the birth of the universe, but it was also the complete opposite of it. The nothingness before the birth of the universe was actually absolute fullness, but what the annihilation cannon created was infinitely close to absolute nothingness. It referred to the true nothingness of the infinitely vast universe before the birth of the universe. At the same time, a star more than 1 billion light-years away from Orpha 3 suddenly exploded. The reason was very simple. A singularity, had suddenly appeared in this star. Inside this singularity was the basic matter that had been annihilated in the barrel of the annihilation cannon. In fact, the mass of this object was not large, and the total weight added up was less than 1/1,000,000th of a milligram, but the energy it contained was extremely terrifying. This was the strange, self-balancing law of the universe. When the annihilation cannon created nothingness on one side, a singularity would be born in another. The Virgo civilization could not control the location of the birth of the singularity. Of course, with the vastness of the universe, the probability of wanting to blow itself up was too low. As for the possibility of other civilizations suffering from undeserved disasters, what did it have to do with them? Civilizations that would perish in the explosion of the singularity were low-level civilizations. If they were destroyed, then so be it. The big explosion in an unlucky galaxy in the distance was still going on. On this side, Chen Guang's fingertips had already touched the mass energy flow blasted out by the annihilation cannon. At this moment, he pulled his mind back to the world of creation. Humans and Protoss entered an unprecedented game space at the same time. This space completely subverted the imagination and common sense of all players, and all players were somewhat at a loss as to what to do. Earthlings, who were originally three-dimensional beings, suddenly saw a world of infinite dimensions. In this plane, time and space did not exist at all, and everything was completely different from the worldview that humans understood. With the original three-dimensional level of Earthlings, when they entered the infinite-dimensional world, they should have been instantly torn into pure energy. However, because humans had the identity of players, they strangely survived under the mandatory rules of the game system. This was a very unreasonable thing, but it was reasonable to force it to exist. Suddenly jumping into the infinite dimension, even the most talented Earthlings could not quickly understand their own state. It was like a fish in the water suddenly being able to fly and even float into outer space. With the intelligence of a fish, encountering this kind of thing would definitely be completely dumbfounded. Although Earthlings had now become a level 3 civilization, what they encountered was infinite dimensions. Even a fish might not be able to compare. However, this was not bad news, because the Protoss were also dumbfounded. Originally, the realm of the Protoss should not have been like this. The gods' understanding of dimensions far exceeded the depth of the Earth's universe, and they could reach at least the 10th dimension and above. At least in the endless divine realm, there should not be a more complicated multidimensional world than this. Unfortunately, the world of creation was infinite dimensions. A person who was 1 meter tall could not reach the plane in the sky, and it was the same for a person who was 10 meters tall. No matter how tall they were, it was useless. Everyone was dumbfounded. In the world of creation, the advantage of the Protoss was gone, and they were forcibly pulled to the same height as humans. In the outside universe, the mission had only started a few minutes ago, but in the world of creation, an infinite amount of time had passed. Now, human players and Protoss players had not even had their first contact, and humans had not even seen each other before. Before understanding the nature of the world of creation, it was almost impossible for any two individuals to meet each other. In terms of probability, this probability was infinitely small. Everyone wandered in the vast sea of stars like tadpoles, not knowing when they would reach the end, and not knowing what to do to meet the requirements of this game test. They remained awake, but they also knew nothing. As for the original intelligent beings in the world of creation, they knew that there were outsiders here, but they could see them, but they could not touch them. These intelligent beings could sense the existence of outsiders, but whenever they tried to stretch out their limbs to capture these outsiders, they would be lost in the infinite plane dimensions that were both divided and continuous. After the initial surprise, the intelligent life forms that possessed infinite dimensions lost interest in the outsiders. They were already used to eternal loneliness. If Chen Guang did not take the initiative to return to the world of creation, then human players and Protoss players would be trapped in the world of creation forever. Suddenly, a leaf fell from the giant 9-story tree in the center of the world of creation and landed on the grassy ground. The leaf quickly melted into the soil, and then a mound emerged. The mound continued to rise, gradually taking shape, and finally turned into a human figure. Another round of light circulated, and the human figure suddenly came to life. It was Qin Guang. This time, he came back with his real body. With the complete formation of his body, Qin Guang officially announced his return. In just an instant, his mind completely received all the information in the world of creation. He saw one after another human and Protoss players struggling in all kinds of strange scenes. There were volcanoes that burned the sky, glaciers covered with frost and snow, forests with countless strange monsters running all over the ground, and the underwater world that gave birth to the complete Atlantean civilization. Every player's situation was different, but in fact, what they were facing was still a moment derived from a fragment of a certain divided dimension. Although it was a moment, it was also eternal. If they could not escape, the players would be trapped in this fleeting eternity. Qin Guang was not in a hurry to act. Instead, he quietly observed the players' actions. It was fine that the human players were behaving badly, but what surprised him was that the Protoss players were just as confused. Almost every moment, a player died. The extremely bad situation made them unable to figure out the true purpose of the game mission. It was extremely difficult to live in this strange space. However, these players were not really dead. At the moment of their death, they would enter another dimension and have a new complete memory. It was very similar to the test in the cup that Qin Guang used to go through. The only difference was that they could not break free with their own strength. Qin Guang closed his eyes and tried to mobilize the himself that existed in all dimensions at the same time. Then he manipulated these selves to enter one dimension after another that accommodated the players and actively contacted the human players. As for the Protoss? Sorry, what was that? In fact, he was just trying it out. He was not sure if he could really affect the progress of the human players. Just like the intelligent life that was born here before, the difference between the two sides was too big. Even if Qin Guang stood in front of these intelligent life and slapped them in the face, they would not be able to feel it. Now in the world of creation, the difference between the human players and him was even greater. Fortunately, he succeeded. As soon as he took the initiative to communicate, the human players seemed to have heard the sound of the Buddha. In an instant, countless insights and mysterious knowledge poured into their ears and went straight to the depths of their hearts. There was no need for more words. The dimensional level of the human players soared. Although they could not catch up with Qin Guang, they could see the tree in the core of the world of creation. Although they were still standing in the same place, their consciousness had jumped out of the many dimension sections that trapped them and reached the essence. The journey of the lost game space finally had a clear goal. They walked forward until they reached the tree. Qin Guang retracted his mind and understood. The reason was not that the human genes had the same origin as his, but because they had the identity of the players. It was equivalent to being issued an identity card by the heavenly Holy Grail. Even if they were high-level residents in this cup, his communication did not directly enter the ears of the players. Instead, it was first transmitted to the entire world of creation. First, it was in line with the dimensional rules of the world of creation. Then, it was integrated by the world of creation into its own rules. Finally, it was directly instilled into the players in the form of rules. Otherwise, with the brain capacity of the Earthlings, they would not be able to withstand such a huge knowledge system. This was letting the world of creation be the middleman, but they did not earn the difference in price. Wait, doesn't that mean? Qin Guang looked around. Sure enough, it was not only the human players who awakened from the bottom dimension. The Protoss also benefited from it. The rules of the world of creation did not distinguish humans from the Protoss. As long as they were players, they could receive feedback after the world of creation changed its rules. Now Qin Guang's bias failed. Both sides were still on the same starting line. After a short silence, the human and Protoss players immediately began to get busy. They only had one goal: to completely suppress the worldview they were in. Then they rushed out and pounced on the tree. The Protoss players had one more goal than the human players. They recognized that thing. In their eyes, this tree was called the tree class. This was one of the two ultimate goals for participating in the game mission. They had completed the first goal, which was to kill Qin Guang. As for the second goal, they thought that after killing Qin Guang, it would not appear again. They thought that this game mission had become a real game. They did not have to worry too much about it. They just had to wander through one game space after another, clear the game, and defeat the insect-like humans. When that time came, they would have completed the order of the principal will. They only had to wait for their real bodies in the celestial realm to rise up under the protection of the principal will. Now there was a slight change. The traitor was clearly dead, but the tree class still existed. But it did not matter. Since they had seen it, they just had to destroy it. After personally opening a path for the players in the world of creation, Qin Guang did not continue to dawdle. Instead, he returned to the real universe. As he entered and exited, the time in the real universe did not move at all. The mass energy flow from the annihilation cannon just happened to touch his fingertips. But nothing happened after that. The mass energy flow from the annihilation cannon, which was enough to destroy half of the Milky Way, disappeared inexplicably. Its power was not exaggerated. On the other side of the starry sky, another extragalactic system about half the size of the Milky Way, 1 billion light-years away, had suffered a devastating blow. It had changed from a regular disc-shaped spiral galaxy to half a moon. The annihilation of half of the galaxy had caused the mass core to shift. The gravity of this unlucky galaxy was completely disordered. The remaining half of the planets were recombining under the pull of the chaotic force field. Perhaps after a few 100 million years, the remaining planets could form a smaller, regular extragalactic system, but it was uncertain how many civilizations and creatures in this galaxy could survive. At this time, the 100 million people in the Orpha 3 kingdoms were completely confused. The light on the inner wall of the vehicle slowly lit up again, but the hearts of the Virgo people on every independent planet were cold. Although they had common wisdom, there had never been a moment in the entire process of civilization like this, where everyone's emotions and thinking had reached complete synchronization. Confusion, despair, self-doubt, and other emotions enveloped all the people of the Orpha 3 kingdoms. What's wrong? Is the annihilation cannon malfunctioning? But the energy of the Orpha 3 kingdoms has indeed been consumed. There is no reason for this energy to disappear into thin air. Even if it's a malfunction, it should at least cause us to self-destruct. Qin Guang did not care how chaotic the people inside were. He just retracted his finger and said again, "Are you a little more clear-headed now? I said that you were surrounded. Why didn't you believe me?" This time, he finally got a positive answer. There was a resonance from inside, as if thousands of people were saying the same thing at the same time. "Great being, we extend our sincerest apologies to you. Sorry to disturb you. Would you believe it if we said that we just happened to pass by and did a little scientific experiment? That's right. You see, we didn't cause any impact on your galaxy." As expected of an advanced civilization, they had so quickly mastered the profound Chinese language and even learned the art of language. Qin Guang chuckled, "Are you guys messing with me? The shock wave you released before that could shatter a planet is still on the way. You wanted to destroy my entire race, and now you're telling me that you were just passing by?" In fact, regardless of whether the other party spoke Chinese or not, Qin Guang could communicate with them smoothly. After all, he was the legendary king of PY transactions. As soon as he said this, Orpha 3 kingdoms fell silent. They could not beat them in a fight, nor could they run away. It was as awkward as it could get. "Are you really willing to accept our surrender?" The chorus inside came again. Qin Guang glared at them impatiently. "Do you have any other choice? Retract the shock wave, or you'll die immediately." On the other side, Orpha 3 used another 10% of his energy to stop the previous cosmic wave. Now that the crisis of Earth's civilization had been resolved, Qin Guang did not feel too much. On the one hand, all the old friends he knew had passed away 3,000 years ago, and he had no acquaintances in the current Earth's civilization. It was probably only the descendants of the Qin family who had some distant blood relations with him. As for the others, there was really no one left. As a successful person, it was quite embarrassing for 3,000 years to pass in the blink of an eye before he had the time to leave behind a successor. In addition, no matter how big the Earthling's steps were now, he would reverse it later. Therefore, even if the cosmic wave could not be stopped, and the Earth's civilization was really destroyed in reality, it could still be salvaged. Now, there were two choices in front of him. Either he could use Orpha Three Kingdoms as a starting point and uproot the entire Virgo civilization, or he could let them go and let Orpha Three Kingdoms become a vassal of Earth's civilization, and let them voluntarily provide all the resources of a higher civilization to Earth's civilization. This could help the Earthlings complete 3 consecutive jumps, transforming from the middle stage of a first-rate civilization to a god-level civilization that ruled a supercluster in just a few thousand years. However, Chen Guang could not guarantee that the entire Virgo civilization would be obedient. It was very likely that they were faking their surrender. Therefore, he decided to do something to completely dispel the Virgo civilization's resistance. This time, he directly used the creation world as a medium and teleported himself inside Orpha Three Kingdoms. What appeared in front of him was a vast starry sky. However, this starry sky was different from the darkness seen on Earth. Instead, it was as bright as day under the extremely bright background light. The stars floating in the starry sky were all small colorful dots. Facing a spacious space of 500 million light-years, even someone as knowledgeable as him was deeply shocked. However, now that he was the boss, he could not lose face. Chen Guang opened his mouth again and said loudly, "Appear in front of me as fast as you can." As soon as his voice fell, the hundreds of millions of modified planets scattered throughout Orpha Three Kingdoms were mobilized at the same time. In less than 10 minutes, more than 100 million modified planets were neatly distributed in front of Chen Guang. It was a spectacular sight. Every Virgo would have their own planet when they reached adulthood. Usually, they would go through deep modifications so that they could warp and shuttle through the interior of Orpha Three Kingdoms, and even if they went to the outer universe, they would still be unimpeded. Immediately afterward, small spaceships flew out from these planets one after another. A few minutes later, many of the small spaceships docked on the large platform that floated over from the governing planet. One by one, the Virgo people got off the aircrafts and stood on the platform like soldiers waiting for inspection, looking up at Chen Guang. The average height of the Virgo people was about 1.3 meters. Their limbs and torso were similar to that of Earthlings. Their arms were long, hanging from their shoulders and dragging on the ground. They had large sapphire-like eyes on their faces. They had no noses or mouths, but there were 2 holes on both sides of their heads that looked like ears. Threads that looked like human hair extended out of the holes. They looked like seaweed that had reincarnated. These were probably the organs that helped them to share their thoughts. In addition, the skin of the Virgo people was silver. Their body structure was not carbon-based, but made up of several strange metals that did not exist in the Milky Way. But this did not mean that they were mechanical life forms. It was nothing more than another metal life form with silver skin, iron bones, and gold flesh. The Virgo people carefully sized up Chen Guang, who was in the air, not daring to breathe. Finally, Chen Guang spoke first. "I think you guys must have many questions. I will not answer them one by one. Let me tell you who I am. Since you guys have collected information on Earthlings, you should know my name." "You are Chen Guang? All-round superhuman?" It was the Virgo people who took the initiative to ask. When hundreds of millions of people used their unique and almost identical vocal organs to say the same sentence, even if they were separated by more than 10 kilometers, the vibration in the void was still very shocking. Chen Guang suspected that this was the secret weapon of the Virgo people. They were planning to use this move to shock him to death. Luckily my bones are tough. If it was an ordinary Earthling, he would have died here. It's good that you know me. So I am undoubtedly a member of Earth's civilization. I will cover for this. You guys have made a mistake. Now, let me tell you how your annihilation cannon stopped firing. With that, Chen Guang stretched out his hand again, slowly straightened his right index finger, and pointed his fingertip at the Virgo people. The sapphire eyes of the 3 senators suddenly changed color. It was as if they were zooming in with a super high magnification telescope. Suddenly, the senators exclaimed loudly, How can the universe allow this kind of material to appear? This is simply ridiculous. At this time, there was actually only a grain of sand on Qin Guang's fingertip. But this grain of sand came from the world of creation. Previously, he went back to take this thing from the world of creation. In the past, he could not take out the things from the world in the cup. That was because the level of the world in the cup was lower than the real world. However, the world of creation was higher than the real world, so he could barely borrow it temporarily. Only a grain of sand was needed to easily absorb the mass energy flow of the annihilation cannon. The reason was very simple. This grain of sand came from the infinite dimension of the world of creation. The energy and information contained in it were countless times that of the Earth's universe. The mass energy produced by the annihilation cannon could not set off the slightest ripple in it. Now that the senators were so surprised, even a god-level civilization could not understand why a grain of sand the size of a grain of dust could give them the feeling that it was countless times larger than the entire universe. With a shake of his hand, the sand of creation disappeared from Qin Guang's fingertip and was sent back to the world of creation. You have no idea who you are going against. Now, I order you to become a vassal of Earth's civilization, and you must hand over all your knowledge and resources without reservation. Do you agree? If you refuse, I will spend a little more time to completely obliterate your entire civilization. You have a total of 11,734,216 vehicles similar to Orpheus. This is the entire Virgo civilization, right? The hundreds of millions of Virgo people below lowered their heads at the same time. They were truly convinced. When the senators saw the sand of creation, the others naturally knew about it at the same time. Although there was no practical meaning in bowing their heads in their civilization, they understood Earth's civilization very well. We are afraid, is that not enough? Very good, this is a good start. I know that your civilization is good at sharing information. If you can convince more kingdoms to come to the Milky Way to broaden their horizons, I welcome it. Well, if there's nothing else, I will leave first. You have annexed many low-level civilizations, so you should know what to do next. After saying that, Qin Guang disappeared from where he stood. It was still a familiar method of the Virgo civilization, instantly vanishing from matter to energy, leaving no trace. What he could do for Earth's civilization was enough. No matter what happened in the future, as long as the Orpheus 3 kingdoms surrendered, Earth's civilization would not have any natural enemies in this galaxy cluster. The Virgo civilization definitely did not have the courage to retaliate. The higher the level of civilization, the more they could understand the horror of the technological generation gap. Moreover, the sand of creation completely crushed them. They would not make an unwise move at the risk of extinction. Next, it was time to deal with the game in the world of creation. Chapter 1323. This time, when he returned to the world of creation, a branch was directly broken off from the 9-story tree and fell to the ground. The final clay statue was more exquisite than the last time. It was a bit like the first statue of the god of the earth that Qin Guang once placed in the Tongshan industrial factory. The clay statue slowly became a real person. Qin Guang slowly opened his eyes and looked up. There were many more portraits of the Protoss on the 9-story tree. It was just a short moment of entering and exiting here, but the giant tree seemed to have grown taller, and its color had become brighter. The mottled bark lines on the trunk had changed slightly from the original irregular state. It still looked irregular, but it gave people a sense of beauty like a work of art. The grass on the ground was still swaying with the wind. Compared with before, these plants had become more spiritual and more energetic. This was a very indescribable feeling. Everything in the world of creation seemed very real before, but after this period of time, on the basis of reality, the entire world of creation could even become more real. All these changes were due to the continuous supply of energy to the 9 special worlds from more than 3,000 worlds in the cup below. These energies corresponded to the different attributes of the 9 special worlds, such as fate, reality, and illusion. They first gathered in the special worlds, and then were divided into different types and condensed into a supply for the world of creation. Not only that, the laws of the original will released when the Protoss projection died were also condensed into the world of creation. Since then, the true mystery of the heavenly Holy Grail had been exposed to Chen Guang. Many things that he had not understood before had also been answered. The heavenly Holy Grail was a big pit left by his previous life's original will of the endless divine realm. Azure was the specific executor, and he was not only the key to open the heavenly Holy Grail, but also the real creator of the entire world of the Holy Grail, and also the specific controller. The meaning of Azure's existence was to prevent himself from losing all his memories after his rebirth and not being able to complete his previous plan. But in order to prevent being seen through by the original will, she also cut off most of her memories, which led to her having to rely on herself in many aspects. In order to make the heavenly Holy Grail perform its intended function, he would first need to enter one realm after another as the master of the Holy Grail and complete the missions that the Holy Grail had set for him. This was equivalent to obtaining a graduation certificate of various unique abilities. After obtaining the graduation certificate, he would need to display his abilities in the real world, which was in front of the people of Earth, and obtain their recognition. This was in order to obtain divinity. When the first statue appeared in Cloud City, Chen Guang had already taken the first step to becoming a god. Although the gods in the endless divine realm did not rely on faith energy to increase their strength, most of them relied on their understanding and research of the divine realm's laws. However, in the god realm, there were indeed legendary stories of beings from the lower realms created by the gods breaking through their shackles and becoming true gods. And the most convenient way for these beings to become gods was to collect the faith of others. Moreover, the Earth universe was not an ordinary low-level plane. Instead, it had an extremely high depth of rules. Otherwise, it would not have turned the tables on the real world after merging with it and completely annexed the entire real world. After the fusion, the world still had the Earth universe as its main body. In the game system, although the initial abilities of the Protoss players were stronger than the humans on Earth, in terms of growth and creativity, the Protoss lagged behind the humans by a lot. Although the Protoss only entered the game as a projection and could not bring all of their own divine power with them, their growth in the game system basically depended on the player's own willpower and creativity. In the case of having a huge advantage in the early stages, the Protoss and the humans on Earth were evenly matched in the end. The humans on Earth had only lived on the small Earth for most of their long history. Whether it was the depth or breadth of knowledge, they were far inferior to the Protoss. Even if the Protoss were a projection and the humans were the main consciousness, it was reasonable to say that the Protoss should have been more comfortable in the game. The fundamental reason for this situation was that the level of the Earth universe was high enough. Humans, a seemingly weak first-level civilization born in the vast universe, were in fact the most perfect existence after genetic selection among the countless planes. Within the Earth universe, compared to the various advanced civilizations that were born earlier, they had a history of less than 2 million years. They had a clear social structure, invented writing, and recorded history for less than 20,000 years. The humans on Earth could be said to be the underlings of the underlings. Chen Guang also knew that in the vast universe, the civilization on Earth was in fact the last intelligent civilization to be born. The civilization that was born on Earth, a primitive civilization located in a distant galaxy, was born more than 2 million years earlier than the civilization on Earth. 2 million years seemed long, but for the universe, it was just a short moment. However, there was a saying that sharpening a knife would not delay the work of cutting firewood. Under the control of the rules of the universe, the later a life was born, the closer its genes were to perfection, and the deeper its soul level was. The people on Earth did not know how strong they were. Their species was born less than 2 to 3 million years ago, and their civilization was born less than 20,000 years ago. To be able to become a middle-level first-level civilization was already the best in the universe. Therefore, Chen Guang chose to become an Earthling and walked all the way to where he was today. At this time, in the world of creation, the human and Protoss players had broken through the broken section of their own dimension. However, after jumping out of one dimension, there was still the next dimension waiting for the players. When breaking through the first-dimensional space, there were casualties among the players on both sides. There were still more than 90 million human players who entered the world in the cup. Millions of people had been sacrificed. There were even more Protoss players left, more than 500 million. More than 10 million gods had been sacrificed. During the 2 times he entered, the reason why Chen Guang felt that the world of creation had changed so much was that the tens of millions of Protoss who had been sacrificed heroically had provided a lot of rules of the original will. If the players on both sides were allowed to develop on their own, no one knew how many years it would take for the players on both sides to break through the infinite dimensions in the world of creation and finally stand in front of the 9-story giant tree. Although the ultimate goal was there and everyone could see it, there was no limit to how long it would take to achieve it. However, in this world of creation, no matter how much time had passed, it was meaningless. 100 years was an instant, thousands of years was the same as an instant, hundreds of thousands of years or even trillions of years were also the same as an instant. In the world of creation, when he, the controller, wanted to care about time, a day could pass like a year, and time would pass much slower than normal. But when he did not want to care about it, he could directly jump hundreds of millions of years later in one breath. At this time, this was exactly what Chen Guang wanted to do. 3,000 years had passed on Earth, and there was no one among the human players that he needed to worry about. So, he was sorry, but he did not care much about the specific process of these players' struggle in the world of creation. He just wanted the players on both sides to finally stand in front of him, see him, and communicate with him. Then, he could crush the Protoss one by one and force the human players to win the final victory. He was a referee and an athlete. There was no other way. He was so arrogant and shameless. After all, he was also a human player. The development of things obviously would not easily go according to the script he wanted. After the tens of millions of Protoss who had been killed in battle returned to the endless world of gods, they immediately reported the news that they had seen the 9-story giant tree. It did not take long for the news that the player's mission had changed to reach the sky and reach the 8 main temples. Originally, when the will of the Lord gods fell into a deep sleep, no matter what happened, they were not to be disturbed. The Lord gods did not simply sleep. They were recovering in a deep sleep and getting close to the rules. No one knew if they would be disturbed when the Lord gods were about to gain something from the rules. If such a thing happened, no matter how trusted the Lord gods were, they would be killed on the spot. But this time was different. The game mission was a heavy burden directly sent by the will of the origin. It was considered the most important event in the realm of gods in recent years. Before the Lord gods went into a deep sleep, they had made it clear that if there was a major change in the game mission, they could directly report it without fear of being punished. The first to wake up from a deep sleep was the Lord God of Chaos, the strongest of the 8 Lord gods. He did not have a physical form, but after seeing the projection of the 9-story giant tree sent by the lower gods, his body suddenly appeared and disappeared in a flash. The lower gods in the Temple of Chaos could even vaguely see his solemn expression. It was obvious that the situation was serious. Soon, the 8 Lord gods once again gathered in the Hall of Origin in the sky of the endless realm of gods. They stood under a giant flower that bore fruit. The shape of the giant flower looked exactly like the deer cry fruit that had taken root in Cloud City for a long time. Great will of the origin, the players we sent out found the tree class in the game. It did not disappear with the traitor's death. The 8 Lord gods said in unison. This was the simplest awakening ritual. Although it seemed like they were just talking, it was actually the resonance of the 8 shallow understandings of the rules. This was also the only way for the gods in the endless realm of gods to actively communicate with the will of the origin. A moment later, a sharp female voice came from the giant flower. I understand. The woman's voice was formed by the will of the origin imitating the shape and voice it wanted to imitate. It was purely for ease of communication. Great will of the origin, what should we do? The 8 Lord gods asked in unison again. The fruit formed by the will of the origin replied with an emotionless voice, We have been deceived. The traitor is not dead. He is still living well. Impossible. I have clearly crushed him with my own hands. This time, only the Lord God of Chaos said anxiously. The other 7 did not synchronize with him. However, it did not cause the rules to resonate. The will of the origin did not hear the doubt of chaos. Instead, it continued to say, "It's all right. We will not make the same mistake twice. Make your own preparations. This time I will send all the gods in." The 8 Lord Gods were shocked at first. The will of the origin had actually admitted its mistake. This had never happened before. In a sense, there was no right or wrong when it came to the will of the origin. Whatever the origin decided must be the truth of the realm of gods. There was no right or wrong at all. If the Lord Gods still retained their humanity, they would have noticed that something was amiss. The will of the origin, which should have been emotionless and would never doubt itself, was actually being imperceptibly assimilated by the emotions of humans. When a perfect and flawless existence displayed human characteristics, it was the moment when she revealed her flaws. Nobody knew how many gods there were in the endless realm of gods. Even the will of the origin itself could not calculate it. The entire realm of gods was too vast. It was so vast that even if the Lord Gods spent their entire lives traveling, even if the Lord Gods could integrate themselves into the rules of the realm of gods and gain the ability to teleport, even if the Lord Gods could move billions and billions of times faster than the speed of light, there had never been a Lord God who could travel to every inch of the realm of gods in their lifetime. It was not that the Lord Gods did not have the time, and it was not that they did not have the energy and ability. It was purely because the endless realm of gods was just too vast. Unlike the Earth's universe, which was endless in terms of vertical space, the endless realm of gods was more like a flat surface, like an infinitely stretched piece of paper. If anyone thought that they understood the realm of gods well enough to know everything up in the sky and down below, it would definitely be an illusion. After crossing a 10,000 feet mountain, there would definitely be thousands of 10,000 feet mountains waiting behind. After crossing 100 million feet river, there would still be billions of rivers ahead. After crossing one border after another, in the endless god realm, there were more and more god kingdom boundaries, or space-time barriers. In each space-time barrier, there was a completely different environment. This environment included climate, terrain, and even gravity, molecular forces, and even the flow of time was different. In the endless realm of gods, it was entirely possible for two sides of the same boundary to present completely different sceneries. On one side, there would be glaciers covered in snow, while on the other side, there would be volcanic eruptions. On one side, a day would pass, while on the other side, thousands and tens of thousands of years would pass. There were many reasons for such space-time barriers. It could be the work of the almighty beings above the ultimate God stage in order to build a divine kingdom, or it could be a naturally formed barrier. However, no matter which one it was almost impossible to cross it without the strength of the ultimate God stage. Some divine kingdom barriers built by powerful divine emperors could not even be crossed by weaker divine emperors. It was even rumored that at a certain distant boundary of the endless realm of gods, there was a mysterious zone that even divine emperors could not pry into. The barriers of these mysterious zones were everlasting natural boundaries. There was even a rumor that although these natural barriers did not cover a large area in the divine realm, the area behind them might even exceed all known areas. Overgods who had fused themselves with the laws of nature could move about the realm of the gods unimpeded, but how could they have the leisure to share their experiences with the lesser gods? After becoming overgods, they were no longer on the same level as the other gods in the first place. Because of this, the 8 Lord Gods, including the Master God of Chaos, deeply understood the terrifying meaning contained in the simple words, "all the gods," that the principal will said. What she meant by all was actually infinite gods. The Lord Gods did not understand why the principal will suddenly made such a decision. Wasn't it a little too hasty and risky? Wasn't it too crazy? There was no need to do this at all. As long as they were willing to pay the price and let the 8 Lord Gods' projections descend, the traitor would not have any more chances. This time, he would be completely obliterated. The principal will would not explain to the Lord Gods. Unlike the other Protoss who were still confused, She had already learned the truth of the world of creation. Even she, who had existed since the birth of the God realm, possessed limitless knowledge, and had seen all sorts of strange and bizarre situations, and was not a consciousness formed after birth, but rather a materialized will born with the God realm, was horrified by the truth. This was simply unfathomable. Why did I have emotions? No, why did I become aware of my existence? Why did I have the thought of me? Could it be the aftereffects of forcibly swallowing the consciousness of the dear emperor? This was too ridiculous. I was clearly the principal will, and I only swallowed the consciousness of a divine emperor. How could I be affected? This unanswered question remained unanswered even when all the protoss in the endless realm of gods were sent into the world of creation as projections. When the principal will began to think about this question, it had already fallen into the trap. This time, the projections sent in by the principal will were at least 100 million times stronger than before. She paid a huge price to give each projection 1/10 of the strength of the original. Chapter 1324. At this time, Chen Guang had just used a cheat in the creation world, intending to jump directly to the moment when both players stood in front of the 9-layer tree. At that time, both players' dimensional levels would reach a level second only to him, or even higher than the level of intelligent life in the creation world itself. At this time, Chen Guang also understood why intelligent life could be born in this infinite dimensional space. This was originally a meaningless thing, and these intelligent life forms were of no help to him. Now, it seemed that this was a preset setting that the heavenly Holy Grail had set in advance when it assisted him in completing the creation world. These intelligent life forms were everywhere, forming their own space and time. The body of each life form was a cross-section of one spatial dimension after another, making them represent another level of perfect genes in a sense. However, in front of the players who had obtained the identity card of the heavenly Holy Grail, these poor intelligent life forms were essentially no different from the plants, insects, and beasts swaying on the ground. In the entire creation world, other than the 9-layer tree, all the other substances and dimensions were actually checkpoints and small worlds for the players to test. In a sense, they were also nutrients for the players, providing energy and experience for the players to advance. Of course, this also included the original intelligent life forms. Thinking about it, these intelligent life forms were quite pitiful, but they did not know that they were being devoured and consumed by the players. They would only think that this was a normal process of aging, illness, and death, or a natural death. In addition, the players did not know that every time they passed through one checkpoint after another, there were lives dying one after another. Otherwise, with the worldview of human players, they would definitely feel a little embarrassed. When determining how many years ahead he had jumped, Chen Guang used a little trick. The dimension of the creation world was infinite, and he could not determine the specific length of time at all. He could not directly take an infinite value, so he first assumed that the value of infinity was n, and then decisively took n-1. As he jumped, the endless heavenly world suddenly appeared in front of him. Countless colorful lights flowed in front of him, looking gorgeous and dazzling. Every beam of light represented the flow of time in a dimensional section. As Chen Guang switched gears, all the dimensional sections flowed like flowing water. Under Chen Guang's gaze, time flowed through one dimension after another. The flow of time here was much faster than the normal flow of time. In the beginning, he still had the energy and thought to observe the situation of the players on both sides in the game, but as time went on, he gradually lost his patience and simply withdrew his thoughts. He did not watch or pay attention to anything, only waiting for the final moment for a great purge. Chen Guang had missed a crucial piece of information. In a certain dimension and time, countless God race projections suddenly descended from nothingness. This countless was not an exaggeration, but a truly infinite number. If it was in the past, perhaps the origin would have the ability to find out exactly how many countless were. However, now that it had been tainted by humanity, the origin will no longer have the leisure to do so. In any case, It only needed to know that the god race it had sent from the endless heavenly world just happened to fill every dimension in the world of creation. The speed of the trader's growth was too terrifying and incredible. This time, it must complete the battle in one fell swoop, and it would not give him any more chances. Before taking out the world of creation and allowing the 3,000 worlds to form a 9-story tower-like structure in the void in the cup, although it controlled the Holy Grail and even had a new version of internal force that combined several abilities, in the endless heavenly world, such a character like him was really not considered powerful. In terms of pure strength, his ability was at most equivalent to a slightly more powerful mortal god. In terms of talent and realm, he was just a young god emperor who was still growing. But all of a sudden, after he came back from the dead, and after the origin will and the 8 main gods woke up after a short period of sleep, they suddenly realized that this guy had completed a terrifying N-level jump in an instant. He suddenly went from a small character to an unfathomable one. He had personally created a plane with no upper limit and left an infinite number of clones of his will in the infinite dimensions of this plane. This meant that it was no longer possible to kill him in the same way as before. Once one of his consciousnesses was erased, he could immediately draw a mental duplicate from the world of creation and multiply it into the main body. In addition, the origin will could not see through the depth of the information in the world of creation. And the tree principle standing in the middle of the world of creation was not ordinary either. Although the origin will had known of the existence of the tree principle a long time ago, it had not seen it with its own eyes after all. It only knew that the tree principle could threaten the heavenly world, but it did not know where the specific threat was. Now the origin will finally saw the tree principle through the eyes of the god race projection. The moment it saw the tree principle with its own eyes, the origin will had a feeling that it was about to be devoured. The tree principle was like a whirlpool. It was obviously just peeking at other people's memories, but it could bring an irresistible attraction to it, luring it to become a part of it. If it was not for the fact that all the protoss in the endless heavenly world added up to fill the world of creation, and that as long as it could control the time in the world of creation and obliterate every world of creation at the same time, it would be able to completely destroy it, the origin would have almost given up. Time suddenly jumped to N1 years later. Chen Guang looked at the 9 people in front of him, and for a moment, he did not know what was going on. According to his imagination, he should have seen about hundreds of millions of human players standing in front of the giant 9-story tree. These people were the true elites of the elites who stood out from the tens of trillions of people on Earth. But this number might not be hundreds of millions, but tens of thousands or even thousands, and there might only be a few people. But in any case, there must be such a small group of people who persevered. The number of Protoss players who persevered to the end should be a little more than the human players, but not by much. Tens of trillions of human players came, and tens of trillions of Protoss players came. Judging by the performance of both sides in the past, although the Protoss players now had a larger base, they often performed average when faced with the same game test. That was why Chen Guang made such an inference. But now the situation was a little different from what he had imagined. He was standing in front of the giant tree, but there were only a total of 9 people standing in front of him. To be precise, they could not be called people, but 9 glowing spheres of different shapes. Of course, if one were to take a closer look, they would discover that the 9 spheres were not simply glowing. The seemingly colorful radiance was actually lines of mysterious symbols and patterns. Chen Guang recognized the black sphere among them. The dark halo flowing on the black sphere gave him the feeling that it was the end of all things. This must be the Lord of Chaos. In that case, the other 8 light spheres around him were at least at the same level as him. 9 lords? No, that's not right. Chen Guang looked at the clump of mist standing at the center of the 9 light spheres. The clump of mist was pure white and seemed to be the polar opposite of the primal Chaos Lord's incarnation. However, the runes that formed its body emitted laws of a deeper level. In addition, this fog gave him an exceptionally familiar feeling. It seemed to be someone he knew. He opened his mouth and asked, "Deer cry? Origin?" At the same time, he turned back a part of his mind to see what exactly had happened. Originally, both the human and Protoss players were only fighting step by step, until a certain moment, countless new Protoss suddenly appeared in the vast creation world. The specific number could not be calculated. The only thing that could be confirmed was that the entire infinite dimension of the creation world was filled with Protoss projections, and they were extremely strong, far stronger than the previous Protoss projections. At present, it was not clear why these enhanced projections had appeared, but they were already standing in front of the final barrier of their respective dimensional ruptures. As long as they took one more step, they would be able to break through the dimensional ruptures and stand in front of the 9-story giant tree. As for the Protoss players and the human players who had entered before, they were in a different situation. Both sides had actually gathered together and entered the same dimensional section. At this time, both sides were fighting for control of this section, waiting for a winner to be decided. Thinking about it, both sides were quite miserable. They had worked so hard, but they were only fighting for a small section, while the others were only one step away. It was a little strange. He thought that the players from both sides had gathered together because of the arrival of other Protoss projections. But in the process of replaying history, he found that the process of upgrading the dimension of the players on both sides had not been affected by any external forces at all. Instead, it was like two rivers converging and finally colliding into the same secondary dimension. Everyone else had a comfortable life in their own world. Only you guys were so unlucky. Hundreds of millions of powerful players were all gathered together. Although they could stand in front of the giant tree after breaking through this dimensional barrier, it was meaningless. The old man already had 9 big shots here that they could not afford to offend. Also, they didn't know if the game system was targeting them, but the dimensional walls in front of the other newly arrived, strengthened projections weren't strong or sturdy, but the dimensional walls facing the hundreds of millions of players who were currently trapped together were incomparably domineering. The thickness, firmness, and recoil force of the dimensional walls were infinitely greater than those faced by the strengthened projections. This meant that unless he intervened, even if the two sides won and obtained the plane core in this dimensional section, they would not be able to rush out. Was this the arrangement of the heavenly Holy Grail? What was the deeper meaning of this arrangement? No, if I was the creator of the heavenly Holy Grail in my previous life, then the operation process in this creation world must be the program left behind by me in my previous life. What was the meaning of my original arrangement? Should I rewind the timeline to the moment when the strengthened God's projections descended? Should I then use my clones in every dimension to crush these strengthened God's projections prematurely? No, there are 9 main gods standing in front of me now, one of whom is suspected to be the origin will of the God realm. Not only is he extremely powerful, but he also seems to be able to interfere with the operation of the Holy Grail to a certain extent. They will not give me the opportunity to act easily. He took another look, and sure enough, the moment the enhanced projections descended, these 9 people stood in front of him. Of course, he could freely travel through the time dimension, but they could not. But to them, from the moment they appeared in front of him until now, it was actually just a moment. Chen Guang did not know that the 9 main gods in front of him were also in a difficult position. According to the original plan of the origin will, they had originally planned to occupy all the dimensional sections at the same time and move completely at the same time, completing the kill instantly. But now there was a section that they could not penetrate. Even with the control of the laws of the origin will, they still could not penetrate the dimension where hundreds of millions of players were gathered. So now, should they kill or not? I don't know what Dear Cry is, nor do I know what the origin is. I only know that you must die. At this moment, a voice came from the fog of laws in the center. Hearing this, Chen Guang immediately exclaimed, "Isn't that the voice of Dear Cry? I had long felt that you were up to no good. As expected, you're really despicable and sinister." Actually, he did not know a thing, it was completely after the fact. You're probably talking about a god emperor in some god realm, I know. But to the entire origin will of the god realm, there is no independent existence in the god realm. Everything in the god realm, from matter to spirit, is just a part of the origin will. The God Emperor Dear Cry that you mentioned has already been very honored to return to the origin and become a part of me. As for being despicable and sinister, they don't exist. The light ball of laws of the origin will said in a very calm tone. Of course, she would not admit that as a great and noble existence like the origin will of the God realm, she was actually a spy. In fact, the real Dear Cry had been targeted by the origin will a long time ago when the daughter of the master god of chaos, Azure, went missing. When Chen Guang's wrath erupted, he passed through the plane barrier of the god realm and rushed straight to earth. The Dear Cry divine consciousness that followed was actually the origin will of the god realm. Just as the origin will said, everything in the god realm was originally a part of it. As a whole, it was naturally very easy to disguise as a part of itself. Therefore, Azure was not able to see through Dear Cry's disguise. She did not have the ability to do so. However, before cutting off her consciousness, Azure had secretly left an obsession in her heart. Apart from Qin Guang, she could not trust anyone. Therefore, many times when Dear Cry tried to probe Qin Guang's memory in Cloud City, it was stopped by Azure in time. At that time, the origin will was deeply integrated with the heavenly Holy Grail. If it rashly fought with Azure, it might not be able to achieve complete victory, so it chose to endure. As for now, when Qin Guang questioned her about Dear Cry, she would not take it seriously. Whether it was Dear Cry, Yu Ting, or even the strongest master gods like the Master God of Chaos and the Master God of Fate, in the view of the origin will, all of them were a part of itself. She could be, but she could also not be. You're stalling for time, but it's meaningless. Suddenly, the Master God of Reality and the Master God of Time spoke at the same time. During this period of time just now, the two Master Gods had already joined hands and used the power of laws of reality and time at the same time, boasting that they had obtained the most real thoughts of Qin Guang at this moment, and even saw what was going to happen next. Qin Guang was shocked. He thought to himself, why am I stalling for time? Anyway, it's already like this. If you're not satisfied, just fight. Is there a second option? Where did you guys get so many scenes from? A bunch of drama queens fell from the sky. Although he didn't know how these main gods managed to transcend to the point where they could see the giant tree while everyone else was trapped in the final level, this wasn't important. These main gods weren't some cabbage sold on the streets. They were the strongest existences in the god realm, the main gods. It was not surprising that they could do such an incredible thing. You guys think you've won? No, this is my territory. Here, I'm invincible. Do I need to stall for time? Forget it, let's not talk anymore. Bring it on, all of you, die. He was no longer the weak rookie of the past. Now, after countless years of lifespan, Qin Guang's combat instincts had already reached perfection. Others thought that he was stalling for time, but he felt that it was better to make the first move while he was still strong. Otherwise, who knew what would happen when the strengthened projections that were about to break through the last layer of the dimensional barrier stood in front of him? These Protoss were too shameless. They sacrificed the weak at the drop of a hat, and then used the 6 gods to combine their powers, just like the hand of the Master God of Chaos that killed him previously. This time, there were an infinite number of Protoss, and in front of him were 9 Master Gods, one of whom was very strong. If the other party used the 6 gods to combine their powers again, it would be too embarrassing for him. Therefore, as soon as he finished speaking, he attacked. As the creator of the world of creation and the highest dimension in this plane, Qin Guang had a unique ability to suppress and control the lower dimensions. As long as he was willing, he could completely control everything in the world of creation to exert a crushing attack on the other party. His influence was macroscopically enough to affect the entire dimension, but microscopically, it was specifically implemented in every wisp of energy, every inch of space, every fundamental particle, and every rule in the world of creation. A terrible pressure came from the world of creation, crushing the origin will and the 8 master gods' respective law spheres in all directions without any blind spots. The 8 master gods, led by the Master God of Chaos, were confused. He was so straightforward. I'm sure. There is no remnant of the traitor's consciousness in that one space. It's a dimension that is not under his control. Suddenly, the voice of the origin will sounded in the consciousness of the 8 master gods. The 8 master gods immediately understood. This meant that they could directly attack without any scruples. There was no need to consider the area that the Protoss projection was fighting for with the human players. As long as the trader's main body in front of him and his other avatars in the N1 dimension were killed at the same time, he would be dead. Then attack. The will of the 8 master gods became extremely condensed in an instant. The rules that they controlled radiated out and began to compete with Chen Guang for control of the dimension cross-section. Chapter 1325. When you are looked at by me, your fate is involuntarily controlled by me. The god of destiny spoke in a clear voice, his voice like a great bell, and his face was like jade. As the god of destiny spoke, the rule light ball representing destiny suddenly rose into the air and immediately expanded, turning into a giant bell floating in the air. It was the bell of destiny that Chen Guang had seen once in the world of destiny. It was almost exactly the same. Since the evolution of the giant bell, Chen Guang's control over the rule of destiny in the world of creation had suddenly weakened a lot. He could even feel that his own fate was being manipulated. In this world of creation, he had a very strong ability to predict the future to a certain extent. But now he had an illusion, and he actually saw his own line of destiny suddenly cut off. This meant that his fate was being tampered with, and he was going to die prematurely? What a joke! As he was thinking about this, the god of truth on the other side also made a move. The light ball representing the god of truth suddenly exploded and spread to all parts of the dimensional space where everyone was. The god of truth wanted to snatch the control of the world of creation from Chen Guang on both the material and energy levels. The rule light ball that the god of illusion had incarnated pounced directly at Chen Guang. Chen Guang didn't have any time to react at all, and the god of illusion directly hit him in the head. Puma, why am I here? What am I going to do? The 3 major philosophical questions of life suddenly rose in Chen Guang's mind, which was the most common disorder in a person's thinking when he had self-doubt. The next 3 questions were further diverged, and Chen Guang's mind had such deep self-doubt as whether he really existed, whether the people on Earth were actually projections created by some high-level life form in the 3-dimensional world, or whether the Earth Online was simply a very real game, or whether he was just a character in a novel. This was the ability of the Master God of Illusion. Through its control over the laws, it could cause anyone who was targeted by it to doubt themselves from the deepest level of their personality, questioning whether everything was real and seeing everything as an illusion. As for the Life Master God, she reached out a gigantic hand from within the ball of light. With another wave, she pointed towards the faraway Chen Guang, who was currently in the midst of falling into an illusory state. In the blink of an eye, emerald green vines began to grow wildly from Chen Guang's body. The vines soared into the sky, growing extremely fast. The nutrients it absorbed were none other than Chen Guang's life force. This was not a simple vine. In the infinite dimensional creation world, every flower, grass, and tree had extremely profound dimensional attributes. This move of the Lord of Life had crossed the infinite dimensional difference and landed directly on Chen Guang's body. The vine that was produced was actually an existence on the same level as Chen Guang's life level. Although he was the overgod of life, in the process of catalyzing life, he was also robbing another life. Life and death complemented each other and accompanied each other. One lived and the other died. On the other side, the Death Master God followed up decisively. A ray of gray light filled with despair shot out from the gray ball that the Death Master God had transformed into, piercing straight into Chen Guang's eyes. Lowly traitor, your life ends here, and your death begins now and lasts for eternity. As the gray light of death pierced into Chen Guang's mind, an extremely dense aura of death arose from the depths of his soul. In an instant, Chen Guang fell into a state of absolute death. It was almost exactly the same as the last time he faced true death. His 5 senses and even his 6th sense were taken away, and all he felt was an aura of death. The Time Master God suddenly turned into a river of time and swept towards Qinguang. Originally, the flow of time in the world of creation was controlled by Qinguang, so he had an unlimited lifespan in this plane. However, after being enveloped by the Time Master God's river, he could feel that his lifespan was rapidly decreasing. Previously, the Death Master God had injected him with the sense of death. Although that feeling was almost tangible, it was not enough to kill him on the spot. However, the Time Master God had changed the length of his lifespan. His unlimited lifespan had suddenly become limited. Although this limited number was still extremely huge, it was already a qualitative change compared to unlimited. Although he did not know where the end of his life was, this end had already changed from nothing to something. The Space Master God collapsed on the spot, and the space magic ball turned into the tiniest basic particles one after another. Each of these particles had a dimensional height that was infinitely close to that of the world of creation, and they even had control of the infinite dimensional power. After breaking up into pieces, the Space Master God dispersed towards Qinguang from all directions, forming a ball, and Qinguang was in the center of this ball. For a moment, Qinguang, who was originally like a fish in water in the world of creation, suddenly felt a little uncomfortable, as if a fish had left the water, a bird had fallen into the sea, and a person had fallen into a swamp. He went from being able to command everything in the world, and suddenly he was surrounded by enemies. This was the control of the Space Master God, turning the space into Qinguang's enemy, suppressing him in all aspects. Chaos, on the other hand, stretched out a hand from the black ball that he had turned into, and stretched out his 5 fingers to grab Qinguang. As expected of the most powerful Master God, this seemingly simple claw contained extremely profound and powerful power. The index finger of chaos represented the end of space, the middle finger the end of time, the ring finger the end of rules, and the little finger the end of divine power. As for his thumb, it had even adapted to the infinite dimensions of the world of creation, representing the end of dimensions, which was equal to n dimensions. This claw of the Master God of Chaos was at least 100 million times more powerful than the one that killed Qinguang the last time. The last time, he had only sent a projection of one hand, but this time, it was a complete projection of the strength and rule, so the power was naturally incomparable. The rule light ball in the center, which represented the origin will, did not move at all. It was unknown whether she was unwilling to make a move, or if she was preparing some big move, but it could also be that something was shackling her. But this was not important. Qinguang did not have time to think about this at all. He was facing a Master God now. No one was born to be a Master God. Every Master God had trained hard from the lowest level, fought step by step, and climbed up step by step. They had experienced countless cruel battles and slaughters. They had become stronger as they wandered between life and death and fought. Their understanding of the laws grew higher and higher, and their divine power grew stronger as well. In the past, the projections of the Protoss were immature in many aspects, but that was not their true self. Their divine will, wisdom, and awareness were often complemented by their own divine power realm and rule understanding. When the projection was weakened when they descended, their state of mind was also weakened. But this time, the strengthened projection and the Master Gods that descended with the origin will could inherit at least 1/10 of the state of mind of the original body in the realm of gods. What was reflected in the battle was the unparalleled battle consciousness of these Master Gods. Even though their tone and attitude were filled with disdain for the traitors that they could not shake off, that was just a natural reaction from high-ranking existences like overgods. In a true battle, they would never hold back, and they would use their full strength when they struck. Even if they had not experienced a battle for many years, this was an instinct that was engraved in the depths of the rule of the soul. The joint attack of 8 Master Gods put Qinguang in a desperate situation in an instant, and he seemed to be in imminent danger. However, he did not panic. Just as he said, this was his territory. No one can defeat me here, not even a Master God, no one. Qinguang said in a muffled voice, and his human body also scattered. Although the human form was the end of evolution, and it was the most comprehensive physical form, intelligence, creativity, and other factors were also taken into account. In terms of combat power, there were too many shackles in the human form with a physical body. It did not matter if he was facing an average enemy, but the opponents in front of Qin Guang were too strong, and they could directly attack him at the level of the rule. He had to change his stance. Since his opponents could transform into energy and rule, he had to transform into energy too. Of course, normal humans could not do this. Even players whose awakened ability was elementalization could only transform their bodies into elements. But elementalization was not the most basic level of energy. In a battle with a master god, elementalization was not enough. Fortunately, his body had been reforged, and it was no longer an ordinary human form. After exploding, he could completely integrate himself into the creation world, and at the same time, he could communicate with his infinite selves in the infinite dimension, and he could precisely control everything in the creation world. If the previous rule attack of the 8 master gods was to seize control of the creation world and kill Qin Guang here, then the Qin Guang that the master gods were facing now had become the real creation world. My fate is decided by me. No one can change it. You don't have the final say. Qin Guang's words came from the void, and the bell of fate, which was the incarnation of the master god of fate, seemed to have been hit by someone. It let out a loud bang and then cracks spread. In an instant, the giant bell broke into pieces, turning into bits and pieces that quickly disappeared. The master god of fate's rule light ball appeared again, but it was much smaller than before. Get lost! Qin Guang shouted again, and the rule light ball that the master god of truth had just merged with the creation world suddenly appeared from the void in all directions and merged again. Just now, Qin Guang used his identity as the master of the world of creation to expel the power of the god of truth from all dimensions of the real world in terms of both matter and energy at the same time, causing him to retreat dejectedly like an outsider who was driven away. Everything is an illusion. I am me. I'm not going anywhere. I'm only going to be myself. Even if I'm really just a character in a novel? But so what? I still have my own life. Everything I've experienced is not an illusion. Memories emerged in the creation world at the same time. These memories were the countless life journeys that Qin Guang had experienced. These journeys were both real and illusory. The infinite number of life experiences allowed Qin Guang to instantly see through the illusion created by the master god of illusion. As Qin Guang's body was completely energized, the vines that the master god of life had produced became rootless duckweeds, falling apart and collapsing. Having lost its source of vitality, the life vine quickly withered and died, and finally turned into dust and returned to the soil of the creation world. Although the life vine had completely replicated Qin Guang's dimensional level, Qin Guang's energization was too complete at this time, and the vines could not take root. As the vines were absorbed by the creation world, the rule light ball of the master god of life trembled slightly and was already injured. Qin Guang targeted the master god of death again, but he did not do anything. He just used his own control of the creation world to completely transform the life vine that he had just absorbed into a part of himself, and then directly used the rule and power of the master god of life to fight against the master god of death's gray light of death. The power of the two master gods was already on par, and with Qin Guang secretly controlling it, the gray light of death was quickly defeated. He had seen real death long ago, and he had even experienced countless life and death situations. When he was killed by the master god of chaos with a slap, what he experienced was complete death. Now, although the gray light that the master god of death shot out now contained the rule of the divine realm, it was still inferior to the creation world. The state of absolute death in the eyes of the master god of death was nothing but a trivial matter in the eyes of Qin Guang, as simple as eating and drinking water. The logic was the same as a two-dimensional life without vision, unable to understand three-dimensional light, and unable to understand the difference between day and night. Immediately after, Qin Guang looked at the river of time, and focused his mind on it, and pointed with a finger. The river of time suddenly trembled, and completely broke away from the control of the master god of time. The surface of the river became wider and wider, and in a moment, it turned into a vast ocean. The original unlimited length of life returned to unlimited, and the master god of time was defeated. The sky shook heavily again, and thunder boomed. Even the 9-story giant tree shook violently, and the master god of space and the master god of truth were driven out of the creation world, and returned to their original form. Shortly after, a huge white hand condensed in the void and reached for Hun Dun's black claw. Soldier against soldier, general against general, the thumb of the huge white hand represented the infinity of dimensions, the index finger represented the infinity of space, the middle finger represented the infinity of time, the ring finger represented the infinity of rules, and the little finger represented the infinity of the new version of inner force. Every finger of the huge white hand corresponded to the end point represented by the chaos black claw, and it seemed that they were evenly matched. However, Qin Guang would definitely win, because he had an extra finger. In the perfect level of genetic evolution, 5 fingers was the most perfect finger structure, and the Protoss also had 5 fingers. However, as a good young man who grew up under the red flag, Qin Guang had seen a congenital 6-fingered youth who was one of his primary school classmates. When he was young, he had watched a classic movie called The 6-Fingered Guqin Devil. Therefore, no one stipulated that intelligent life could only have 5 fingers, but they had to consider whether it was necessary or not. Although 6 fingers was a little more deformed than 5, and the extra 6th finger was often cumbersome and not practical, it was still an extra finger after all. Now, Qin Guang wanted to directly suppress the master god of chaos, so he chose to slightly sacrifice the quality of his evolutionary height and increase the number of fingers. This was because just now, after absorbing the attacks of the other 7 master gods, Qin Guang had a new understanding in his heart. That's right, the rules. This was something that the 8 master gods, including the master god of chaos, could not do. Although they could transform their bodies into rules, their own understanding of the rules was limited by the origin will and stayed at a very shallow level. However, Qin Guang was different. He might not know much about the rules of the divine realm, but this was his creation world. The depth of dimension and information was slightly better than the divine realm, and there were also rules in the creation world. The extra 6th finger of Qin Guang represented the infinity of the rules that chaos could not achieve. After the appearance of the 6th finger, the balance between the giant white hand and the black claw of chaos was broken. The black claw of the master god of chaos was smashed into pieces easily, while Qin Guang's giant white hand grew with the wind and swept towards the master gods. As he said, this was his territory. Even if the opponent was a master god, he had the strength to win. At this moment, the rule light ball in the middle that represented the origin will finally moved. Light and shadow flashed, and the figure of a little girl gradually appeared. Qin Guang had never seen her before, but he could guess who she was in this form. Other than Lu Ming, who had been swallowed by the origin will, there was no one else he could think of. Seeing that the others were all at a disadvantage, she was finally willing to make a move. At the same time, Qin Guang's mind briefly fell on other dimensions. Sure enough, while the master gods were fighting, the strengthened god race projections in other dimensions were not idle. He did not know how they did it, but they could actually find his will doppelganger in the dimensional space and launch attacks on it. This was simply unimaginable. Will doppelgangers did not have a physical body and could not be captured. However, these strengthened god race projections had clearly received some benefits before they descended, allowing them to see and even touch Qin Guang's will doppelganger. However, the battles seen in these dimensions made Qin Guang laugh. Most of the strengthened god race projections who took the initiative to provoke him were no match for his will doppelganger, and they were so overwhelmed that they could not breathe. Only a very small number of strengthened god race projections with God Emperor cultivation had the upper hand, but they did not destroy Qin Guang's will doppelganger. He did not know what they were waiting for. But the strange thing was that even though the low-level god race projections were at a disadvantage, they did not panic at all, as if they still had trump cards that they had not shown. I thought that there was no need for this, but now it seems that I have miscalculated. But you won't be so lucky next time. Lu Ming, the incarnation of the origin will, spoke in that crisp Lolita voice again. Her tone was cold, giving people a strong sense of disharmony. Chen Guang grinned slightly and did not answer. Although he did not know much about God, nor did he know what tricks the origin will had at this time, he knew that it was definitely not trivial. So, as a well-informed young man, of course, Chen Guang would not let himself become a villain who died because of talking too much. Don't be fooled by his silence at this time, he was actually up to no good. At this time, the giant white hand that he struck out was only an attack on the surface, but his real killing move had already invisibly approached the opponent. Just at the moment when the giant white hand was about to envelop, the space beside the Lord suddenly split open, and countless tentacles sprang out of the crack, sweeping towards the Lord at a very fast speed. This was the big move that Chen Guang had prepared. He wanted to kill in one blow and catch the opponent off guard. His method wasn't very advanced. It was to first control the will of his doppelganger to accumulate energy in other dimensions, and then directly tear through the dimensional barrier next to the Lord God, stabbing these extremely lethal and destructive long tentacles at the other party. Seeing this, the origin will did not panic at all. She only stared fiercely, and two rays of divine light emerged from her pupils, piercing the sky of the realm of creation. Chen Guang's giant white hand and billions of long tentacles did not even get close to the Lord, and they were all absorbed by the origin will, probably turning into its nutrients. The divine light in her eyes pierced through the sky, and an abundant amount of divine power descended from the sky, pouring into the realm of creation. In an instant, the 9-story giant tree in the realm of creation trembled violently and actually grew wildly again. The infinite sections of the dimensions vibrated at the same time. Flowers, trees, birds, beasts, insects, fish, cities, roads, and so on were like sponges soaked in water, evolving at an extremely fast speed. The origin will finally pulled the laws and the source of divine power in the entire endless divine realm into the realm of creation, with only one goal: to restore the original strength of the Lord and the other projections of the gods. Time seemed to stand still at this moment, and countless figures fell from the hole pierced by the divine light. Most of them quickly dissipated in the air of the realm of creation, probably merging into the various sections of the dimensions. Among them, 9 shadows directly landed on the ground, merging into one with the 8 Lord and the origin will. Even Chen Guang felt a terrifying pressure bearing down on him as he unleashed his demonic might. The Lord had ruled the divine realm for countless years, and among them, there was even the origin will that controlled all things in the divine realm. Kneel! The origin will and the 8 Lords shouted in unison. In fact, this was a meaningless thing. If it was the origin will in the past, it would not have done such a superfluous thing. But now, she was in the image of Lu Ming, and had once merged with the body of the heavenly Holy Grail, with human-like characteristics. She was doing this to make the traitor, Chen Guang, completely submit. This is impossible. Chen Guang was still in the void, merging into the laws, but he could still feel the unparalleled pressure coming from the other party. Then die! The origin will shouted, and divine light shot out from her eyes again, but this time, the divine light did not form a beam, but spread everywhere in the realm of creation. The other 8 Lord gods who had completely recovered the strength of the divine realm also did the same, each displaying their own power. The other projections of the god race in the infinite sections of the dimensions also all turned into their original bodies, each displaying their own unique skills, such as a punch to the sky, or using the realm as a guide to ignite the sky-burning fire, or absolute ice, freezing all things. At the same time, Chen Guang only felt that countless of himself were completely blasted into pieces at the same time. The realm of creation could no longer withstand this terrifying energy, and instantly exploded. With a loud rumble, cracks appeared everywhere, and actually scattered like broken glass. The 9-story giant tree, which was also the big trouble in the eyes of the god race, quickly withered, and then turned into rotten wood, collapsing with a loud bang. At this time, he finally understood what the god race was up to. They had waited for a long time, just to kill all of themselves, at this moment. I've lost again? I fell into the same pit twice in a row? All of my mental doppelgangers are gone, and the realm of creation is also gone. Next, the origin will completely destroy the entire heavenly holy grail, right? I'm afraid I'm completely finished this time. Just as he was thinking this, he suddenly froze. Strange, wasn't I already dead? Why is my mind still so clear? I don't feel anything at all. Finally, we finally have the last laugh. The heavenly holy grail is mine. In a daze, Qin Guang vaguely heard someone speaking, and it was familiar Chinese. What's going on? Oh, right, there's still a place in the realm of creation that hasn't been destroyed. That's right, it was the neutral territory that the human and god race players had fought over in the Holy Grail. That originally inconspicuous section of the dimensions seemed to have an exceptionally solid barrier, and even the strengthened god race projection could not penetrate it. It seemed to have been spared. Does this mean that I actually had a doppelganger in the neutral territory from the beginning? Doesn't the origin will know? Oh, right, I don't even know myself. I think I've also deceived the origin will. What the hell? The heavenly holy grail is actually just a teacup. And it's made of antique glass? Why is there a man on it? Chen Guang opened his eyes. Why did this man open his eyes? My awakened ability. Cries of extreme pain came from the mouth of the man holding the heavenly holy grail. Chen Guang walked out of the portrait on the grail and stood in front of the man in person. He ignored him and looked around. This was indeed the contested territory he had seen before. This was on top of a high mountain. A mountain road spiraled from the top of the mountain to the foot of the mountain. Along the way, there was devastation everywhere. These were the traces of an extremely tragic battle, but there were no corpses. In such a huge section, there was no one else but the man who was crying out in alarm. He was a human and a huaxiao at that. Of the hundreds of trillions of players who had been put into the realm of creation, he was the only one who had the last laugh. Alright, stop crying. You don't feel any pain at all. The awakened ability in your body was only lent to you by me. You don't lose anything by returning it to me now. As Qin Guang spoke, he took a deep breath. Countless kinds of strange energy that permeated this dimension section were flying toward him. The awakened abilities left behind by the dead players in the realm of creation were gathering toward him like rivers returning to the sea. The man was stunned at first, then looked at Qin Guang blankly. You are... Qin Guang nodded with a smile. That's right, it's me. Who are you? Qin Guang said, what the F***ck? He had thought that this guy knew him. After all this time, he was not his believer. He was just a top-level player. Forget it, you can go. I'll send you back to Earth. Your mission is over. The game mission is over. With a wave of his hand, Chen Guang tore open the space and sent his consciousness back to Earth. Chen Guang then turned his gaze to the distance. The realm of creation of the infinite dimension was recovering and evolving rapidly. But not long after, the origin will stood in front of him again with the 8 lords. This time, they had expressions. This is impossible. There was a hint of anger in the tone of the origin will. Nothing is impossible. There are 2 heavenly holy grails. One is the female cup, and the other is the male cup. The female cup is glass, and it's on the outside. It was me in the male cup. I've been waiting for you here. As Qin Guang spoke, he casually grabbed the glass beside him. There were no more decorative paintings on it. It was indeed beyond my expectations that you could kill me in the realm of creation. But now it seems that this unexpected scene was also within my calculations. I should have been killed by you like this. Otherwise, how could I have made you willingly merge the endless divine realm with the realm of creation? With another wave of his hand, Qin Guang's left palm broke through space and time. He took out the female cup, printed with glass from a certain museum on Earth. What are you doing? The Lord of Chaos asked coldly. This is Azure, my daughter. Chen Guang blinked. Let me ask you a question. What is the daughter of Zhongdiandian? He knew that the lords would not answer, and he did not intend to get an answer from them. Instead, he answered his own question very quickly. The daughter of Zhongdiandian is another starting point. Before he finished speaking, Chen Guang grabbed 2 cups in his left and right hands. He quickly approached them and slammed them together. Bang! The heavenly Holy Grail, which was supposed to be indestructible, actually shattered like an ordinary glass cup. Nothing seemed to have happened, but Azure, who was dressed in a feather robe, slowly appeared behind Chen Guang. She took another step forward and stood side by side with him. Azure looked ahead with a cold gaze. When she glanced at Lu Ming, there seemed to be a flash of sadness, but it was quickly relieved. As long as they could achieve their goal, everything that was lost could be taken back. The Origin Will and the 8 Lords knew that something was wrong and tried to break free. But the Holy Grail had already shattered. The 3,000 worlds in the Holy Grail, even the void in the Cup and Cloud City, were disintegrating at the same time. The level of this disintegration had surpassed all dimensions, laws, and rules. It was irreversible, but at the same time, it formed an unbreakable barrier. The first to die in the void were the low-level Protoss who were deprived of all energy and rules. But this time, they did not lose their projections, but their true bodies. What followed was the collapse of over 3,000 worlds in cups from the 1st to the 9th layer. Everything returned to true nothingness. True nothingness was an existence that was even more profound than the nothingness that existed before the birth of the Earth universe. At this moment, this true nothingness crossed planes and gathered behind Chen Guang from the void. Feeling the unprecedented power, Chen Guang raised his hands. I, the Radiance, from today onwards, break the God realm. Azure, who was standing beside him, raised her hands at the same time and said in an extremely solemn tone, I, Azure, from today onwards, become the second Origin. 4 rays of light shot out from the palms of the 2 people, enveloping the Origin Will and the 8 Lords. No matter how crazily they struggled, it was futile. Perhaps only a moment had passed, or perhaps hundreds of millions of years had passed. The Origin Will and the 8 Lords had completely melted into the light, becoming a part of Chen Guang's power. When Chen Guang turned to look at Lori, the latter smiled and retreated. She pulled some distance away from Chen Guang and emitted a multicolored radiance around her. The ground formed invisibly under her feet. The sky appeared above her head. Azure herself gradually became invisible, growing again with a whistling sound. In the blink of an eye, she had turned into a giant glass tree that could support the heavens and the earth. This was the true face of the tree, representing new life. A moment later, a deep hole slowly opened under the feet of the tree that Azure had turned into. Entering this hole represented entering a higher plane and world in the endless God realm. However, Chen Guang was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, he silently waved his hand and rebuilt the real universe that had just collapsed. In this real universe, the trajectory of humans on Earth would continue to follow the future after 5050 AD. Humans on Earth, who had already become a God-level civilization and had glimpsed the origin of the universe, nothingness, in the endless God realm, would have a bright future in this real universe. As for the world that Chen Guang really wanted to return to, he would create another one. That would be the autumn of 2016 AD. At that time, Wenwen had not yet died, and he had just become famous. After doing this, Chen Guang lifted his feet and walked into the infinite tunnel under the glass tree. Earth, Chengdu City. On the morning of November 19, 2017 AD, an author named Thing in the Fire was sitting in front of the computer like a zombie, typing this urban novel that had tortured him for 2 whole years. He felt that his story had been told, but he could not think of a perfect ending. Suddenly, a voice came from behind him. Buddy, look back. He turned around like a dumb goose. Chen Guang looked at this prematurely aged middle-aged man and sighed. Although I had guessed it a long time ago, this kind of truth is still quite despairing. I actually really am just a character in a novel. Did you feel good making me up? That actually, it wasn't very good. But the poor thing in the fire took a heavy slap on his face, and he was stunned. No one would believe it, but I was King slapped by the male protagonist in my own novel. From now on, you have to give me real freedom. I want to live for real. Chen Guang restrained the urge to strangle this old man. When he thought of his fate being manipulated by this old man, he gritted his teeth in hatred. He was dumbfounded. What should I do? Get out of my way. Chen Guang pulled him up from the chair, grabbed the keyboard, and started typing on the computer, writing 4 words. To be continued. Then, Chen Guang opened the author's platform of Thing in the Fire, uploaded the chapter, and clicked Publish. Then he changed the status of the work from serialization to finished. That's it? He asked in confusion. Chen Guang nodded. Yes, from now on, you can't write any more words in this book. This way, I will be free, and I will have my own future. Goodbye, oh no, goodbye forever. Chen Guang grinned and said meaningfully, End of the book. You're tuning into the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.